All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Break the Rules stream. I'm your host, Lev Polyakov, at LevPo on Twitter, LEVPO on Twitter. It is a great pleasure to be here with Huntsman, aka C. Kennedy. And I want to first of all, you are a senior fellow for the Security Studies Group. You are an expert on logistics, supply chains, all that very interesting stuff. And you are also a friend of David Reboy, who is also part of that group, correct?
Yeah. And I can just use my name as Ross, but I kind of outed myself here a few months ago. But yeah, I've been a part of a security studies group since early to middle part of last year. Primary emphasis on contributing and sort of furthering discussion towards not only what does an America first sort of logistics and supply chain policy look like, but also uh, do a little bit more about helping the world kind of understand how the interconnectedness of supply chains has driven a lot of benefits to us, but has also exposed us to some weaknesses that maybe we wouldn't have had otherwise if we had, more of a domestic, robust manufacturing policy as opposed to a very sort of globalized economic and supply chain paradigm. So it's been a great experience. It's been a great honor. Jim Hanson's a big part of that as well, and Brad Patty. So there's some really phenomenal minds associated with that group, doing good things within the group, but also, outside of the think tank environment and in the real world. It's definitely humbling to be a part of that group.
Now, why did you become a part of that group in the first place? And also, are you an actual huntsman?
I do hunt actually. I do hunt mainly deer and but being here a Midwest boy and things like that, that tends to be a lot of what we're doing. Um, but yeah, I do hunt. I do stalk. I do work out of tree blinds or hunt from the ground, things like that. So I try not to. I don't ever hunt over bait. I don't ever make it too easy on myself. It doesn't feel right or ethical or in alignment with God's law, so to speak. If I make it too easy. Got involved with security studies group. Very very strong group of minds, very diverse set of minds and perspectives within the team, and have always been very interested in what can we do from a grand strategy standpoint as the United States to continue to further our interests in the world, while at the same time really kind of following that rule of no bid, no percentage.
And I think there's a bit of a I think there's a bit of a delay, but anyway, hopefully that's going to pass. When it comes to being in this security studies group, do you view in a way like you were talking about hunting that there has to be a certain balance to be maintained? That when it comes to the relationship that's between the United States and China right now, some things may be a little bit
Mm-hmm.
off balance in that same sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's there is almost a toxic interdependence between the two countries, and I say toxic in the sense of while we're so tightly interlocked with their economy and their manufacturing base, and they with our money, and with the environment of security we've provided in the global commons, that any sort of divorce, so to speak, or any sort of attempt to shift the balance back and forth and try to find maybe some detente is going to be very much zero sum to somebody. So we do not have a healthy interdependence on one another. And perhaps there are things we could do to rein that in or bring that in. But really, since the 1990s, China has quietly followed, but now a lot more loudly in the last, I'd say, 5 to 10 years, has followed a doctrine of civil military fusion. So it is not possible for a company who is manufacturing in China and exporting to an importer in the United States, a shipbuilder in China who's building a ship for CMA CGM, which is a French company. It's not possible for them to engage in pure commercial activity without also being mandated to serve the interests of the Chinese Communist Party. And so everything that they do, whether we want to or not admit this, is inflected with, if for whatever reason, and you can't protest, if for whatever reason you are called upon within your capacity or role as a Chinese company to serve the interests of the CCP, they will tell you to do it and you will do it. And if you don't, you will go the same path that we've seen Jack Ma say follow over the last few months. In the United States, we are, and this I don't think is controversial to say, we are a sort of the inverse in a lot of ways of China, where the capitalistic need, the capitalistic capability base serves the political master, and in the United States, in a great many ways, it is the opposite. It is the political masters who serve the financial and economic and manufacturing interests in the United States. Is Congress powerful? Absolutely, Congress is extremely powerful, right? And they are one of the triune branches of government. But I don't think there's anybody that can dispute that Amazon or Apple, Microsoft or Google, in a great many ways, in terms of the impact to our day-to-day life, holds the real power. They hold the cards. And we will see the interests of Washington, D.C. and the 202 area code serve, in a lot of ways, the interests of, I'd say the top Wall Street firms, but certainly your big banks, your big everything in the United States. So when you have a situation where one government has chosen to weaponize the private sector against a country that by and large has built its power base upon the private sector with some influence and regulatory capture from the government domain, what you have is an impossible circle to square, where there cannot be any decoupling, there cannot be any economic growth any longer without there being some really extreme pain to some sector of the economy, both economies really.
While he's not here right now, we had a conversation previously, a very spicy one, with this guy named Logo Diadalos, who was talking about how if America's priority right now, with all of these different Wall Street firms and all these different companies, is to make as much money as possible, to squeeze every dime out of the American populace, to get rid of the middle class, he thinks that China, and I know he's not really here to defend himself, so I don't want to go too hard, but basically he thinks that China, the government there, especially Xi Jinping, who he considers to be the the best ruler that we've had in an incredibly long amount of time in history, that he has a certain responsibility towards the Chinese people, and everything that's being done is for the good of the Chinese people so that they would have a better quality of life. I don't speak Mandarin. I don't live in China. The closest thing is that I did have a Chinese ex-girlfriend from Beijing, so I got a little bit of a little bit of an opportunity to.
Her, man, you're gonna need her to speak the lingua franca of half the world.
Oh man, you're probably right, but listen, it was too much at that point for me to be able to stand. I don't want to get into details, but I think that certain qualities that, who knows, maybe they skewed me away from looking at China as being a benevolent force for good, but certain qualities, even in the way that she conducted herself over time, they kind of start seeping out. And it was very different, by the way, than my second Chinese girlfriend, who I had right afterwards, who was actually from Georgia. And her parents were from mainland China. They emigrated to the United States. And I think it was because they were so damn strict with her all the time, very punishing, that she ended up going 180. And she was the complete opposite of my first Chinese ex. So in a way, I see that there is this element of authoritarianism that I don't think it's that healthy for people to live under that kind of state. But then again, what do I know? So tell me, I know it's a little bit further away from logistics and shipping, but from what you were able to get, what is the general consensus of quality of life, but also just the mindset that Chinese people that you were able to speak with who have lived in mainland China, possess?
That's a great question. It's also a really loaded question, right? Especially since I still have active business interests in a great number of parts of China, as well as Southeast Asia and India and, other far-flung parts of the world. But the simplest, most straightforward way to answer that question is, if I'm in the United States and someone asks me a very point-blank question that could be perceived when I answer it to be critical of the regime or to be critical of the ruling class, am I going to censor myself, or am I just going to be able to say whatever the hell I want? And then if I go abroad, am I going to censor myself to be able to say whatever the hell I want? And the answer is probably going to be largely similar. I can kind of sort of say whatever I want. if I'm in China and all of my communications are tied into Chinese telecommunication networks, Chinese apps, phone calls that are being conducted, and I frequently have phone calls with China. It's multiple times a week. I'm having to make those phone calls over things like WeChat or whatever it may be, and there is a very palpable tension and awareness that what you say can and will be used against you outside of a court of law if the issue decides to be pressed. China has a pervasive security apparatus. It inflects every part of how the society functions, particularly from the business standpoint, particularly when you're dealing with Westerners like Americans. There is a very, very friendly but underlying paranoia almost over what can I say, what can I not say. And I will tell you that if you can get a great number of Chinese nationals at all levels of society, whether they come from the working class or they come from, maybe one of the upper crust class, like, business owners and things like that, even party officials, if you get them outside of China, if you get them in an environment where they feel a little bit more comfortable to speak their minds, you may get a very different take. You may get a very different set of answers. And it is a very interesting dynamic to see. It surprised me, when I was younger and just kind of getting into the business world and doing a lot of business with China, particularly in the agriculture domain. I'd have to talk to the traders while they were, living at some level within the sphere of control. And this was in the early 2000s. This was before, in a lot of ways, the world really understood what was going on. And then they would come over here and I would hear completely different stories from the exact same people, or different shades of the story that would contextualize things. There are a lot of Chinese who are nationalists, and proudly so. And that's okay. That is absolutely okay. I think the world is better when people anchor themselves in a sense of higher ideological purpose to a homeland or to a tribe or to a community. But you have to have something that grounds you beyond fundamental, pure, self-serving self-interest. So that is a good thing. I don't mind that that a great number of Chinese citizens have that very strong nationalistic fervor. Where I take issue with it, in the same way I take issue with on the U.S. side, is that sense of, okay, I'm proud of my country. I want my country to be great. I want my country to be successful and to do big things and to be very powerful in the world. Then there is, I think, everything in the world and everybody in the world should bend to the will of my country. And I take issue with that when the United States does it. I take issue with that when, Europe, either individual countries within Europe or the greater, Eurosphere. I take issue with it when China does it or Russia does it. I want to see a cooling of relations between PRC and between the US. But at the same time, I recognize that if they decide to continue bullying the world, whether it's through commerce or through overt militarism or through gray zone sort of behaviors, which I talk a lot about publicly, that somebody somehow is able to stand against that and say, we're going to draw a line here. You are not going to engage in these behaviors and these hostilities or in these malignant sort of stratagems. And at the same time, we're not going to engage in similar things against you. That's very Pollyanna-ish, I know. But it should be the goal, even though we recognize that we'll never get there. And so to the extent that we can, we want to be able to use the tools that we have at hand, the mechanisms of the American economy, the mechanisms of the Chinese economy, to find ways to work together and stay at that below threshold level of conflict and tension. And they can be proud of their country, I can be proud of ours, and at the same time, we should still theoretically be able to find ways to work together.
I definitely hope we could theoretically find ways to work together. But before that, quick question. The chat's been wondering, what exactly are you wearing? Is it a karate gi?
No, it's just it's like an Under Armour like pullover.
Okay, there we go.
For whatever reason.
Yeah. So don't so Chad, Geo may not be here, but don't say I never do good things for you, okay? I listen to the chat. I listen to what you guys have to say. And by the way, all the new people who are watching this, don't forget to subscribe and keep subscribing. Patreon.com/break the rules. Anyway, what concerns me more about China is that, let's say under Deng Xiaoping, he initiated the policy of there being term limits. I believe it was around 10 years or so. And now that is not the case anymore. Again, I have not really gotten into the nitty gritty of how exactly Xi Jinping is operating things over there. But my concern again is that dictators do have a tendency over time to start getting a little bit comfy in being in that position, especially if you're somebody who completely gets rid of term limits. Then I don't think you're somebody who wants to go away. And when you keep staying there, I think that there would be a tendency to start rotting from the inside, surrounding yourself by a lot of butt kissers over time, by a lot of brown nosers, and as a result, a lot of the things that maybe Deng Xiaoping rightfully did, and China may still be benefiting from, may start going into a downward spiral. Again, that's just an opinion, but are there any things that are going on the ground that would lead me to believe that or no?
So what Xi Jinping has managed to do very effectively is to convince a great number of people that it is in their best interest that he remain in charge, from a nationalistic standpoint, from an economic standpoint, and those who don't subscribe to it, by and large, go along with it anyway. And there is a very strong, intense desire to survive in every human being. And if you've created a paradigm where when you're having to almost run game theory with yourself constantly, if I say this, if I do this thing or whatever, what is the consequences going to be? By and large in America, we don't really think in terms of consequences. We think in terms of opportunities, right? So what I mean by that is if I take a risk and I step out on a ledge to do something that is within the parameters of the law and things like that, my default mindset is what is the benefit going to be to me? What is the upside here? And in a lot of parts of the world, and including in a place like modern day China, where you very much have a very strong police apparatus, you very much have at all levels of society this sort of creeping sensation of if I do this, what's the consequences going to be to me or my family? That's a very different sort of mindset. And so it's almost hard to get people to understand or to separate that feeling or that mentality and frame it then in terms of, well, it could feel like this. It could be this. Why don't you think that way? It's just not, for a lot of them, part of their even their mental makeup or their schema of the world. You hear similar stories about, people who get out of North Korea and they don't even understand that there are words for things, right? That there are words for love or there's words for family because it's not part of the mental makeup they grow up with. You also see in a very profound way coercion even reach across the ponds. I saw someone in the chat here say even expats, people who live overseas, people who work overseas, but are Chinese nationals, they will either, in some cases, willingly provide information or willingly, we'll just say illicitly transfer intellectual property back home. But in a lot of cases, they will do it because they understand implicitly the expectation is if I don't do this, if I'm in a position to do something and I don't, there could be consequences for the people I love back home. And so it's very difficult for us in the United States, where we are a quarter the population of China, and we're trying to maintain a peer advantage to them. If they do not do things to shoot themselves in the foot, they simply have numerical superiority, right? They're going to have more of the top 10% of their students are going to outnumber 80% of our student body. So you're in this situation where the weight of numbers works against us. The weight, frankly, of our own greed as Americans has worked against us because we've offshored and transferred so much of our own supply chain sovereignty. So what we have done is we have co-located or completely located fundamental aspects of what we consider in our society to be very important to us. Our ability as consumers to buy whatever we want, our ability to engage freely in commerce, but we've co-located a lot of that into a country that lately, in the last 20 years, certainly accelerated under the reign of Xi Jinping. This sense that is now a leash to snap around our necks as Americans and dog walk us around the world. And we have to recognize. Go ahead.
Oh, no,
go ahead.
I just want to say, in a way, it reminds me of the Opium Wars, but in reverse, where England was giving all this opium to the masses of China. Now we have this opium of a lot of these cheap products. So I think that would be an issue. What I'm also thinking about, though, is that when it comes to not just the quality of goods that comes out of China, but the amount of money that allowed China to excel in the first place when it comes to how much you pay people in the first place. If the middle class of China is starting to rise up right now, people are getting more pay. If there's so many people who are living in China today, and eventually a lot of them are going to want to be paid just as much as, let's say, the Americans are paid, how sustainable would the original model be that the Chinese created?
I mean, it would be fundamentally unsustainable to orient our supply chains in the exact same way and according to the same business practices that we've adopted really since the 1990s. The 80s was really the time we said China's opening up, China is a friend. All the Harvard MBAs started to get the brilliant idea that outsourcing was the way to go. And it began with components. It began with things that were just cheap parts in larger, more expensive products. And it has now grown to the point where there's, in a lot of ways, very little of what we would consider normal consumer goods that we utilize in the United States. The vast majority of our computers, certainly most of the components within the computers, are made in Asia, if not always in China, but for a large part in China. And so we gradually eroded and gave away sovereignty and of our supply chains, or even the capacity and capability to produce these things at a cost-effective scale. And that has held us back, because I think we would have done is we would have found ways to automate. We would have found ways to work within the framework of our smaller population, our larger, more expansive regulatory state from the environmental side. We would have found a way, I think, if we'd have been forced to stay within that world of doing most things ourselves, or at least within North America, we would have found ways to make that work. But we didn't. We said we don't need to make that investment, because we can just send it to a place where they work for pennies on the dollar compared to an American worker, and more or less where they can advance the ball supply chain wise a lot faster, because they don't have the same regulatory requirements we do.
Here is an article.
They'll dump chemicals, right? If those decisions get made, we can.
Well, definitely. I mean, here's an article talking about South Korea, how it has, I believe, 631 robots per 10,000 employees already. So they're an example of a small nation that was able to automate. We could have done the same thing. It just seemed like we were we made a pretty bad deal for ourselves here. But regarding whether it's sustainable on China's part, let's say, like how much of China's GDP is exports of all of these different products versus things that they do internally?
I don't know the raw numbers offhand, so I don't want to spit that out. What I do know is that about 20% of everything made in the world is made in China from a manufacturing standpoint. If it is a manufactured good or a sort of a primary raw material that gets turned into a secondary raw material to make other products, 20% of that's made in China, roughly. And that number bounces around a little bit. But enormous part, if it were to go away, a crippling part of their GDP is directly connected to the things they make and export to the rest of the world. And there was a time when it was just small consumer goods. And then it became, cheap electronics. And then it became, cheap raw materials, like cheap Chinese steel or cheap drywall or cheap plywood, right? Now they have advanced the ball to the point where they are manufacturing. They are the largest ocean vessel manufacturer, right? And they've taken that intellectual property that was transferred to them so they could make ships there instead of in, say, the Korean shipyards or the Japanese shipyards or in Europe or the US. And they've taken that and they've iterated and they've iterated and they've iterated and they've continued to fail forward into the point where they took maritime shipbuilding expertise and now they're applying it to building their Navy ships. Now they, components that were for making speedboats in the United States, but essential raw material or essential components of those boats were made there. They said, well, okay, we already know how to make the engine. We already know how to make the electronics. We already know how to make all of these things. All we need to do is just figure out how to design a hull that can withstand that. And now they have the ability to make, missile boats for their Navy. So everything that we have done is we've gradually over time given them the tools and the resources, the availability to do things for us. And they finally woke up one day and said, guess what? It's no longer yours and we're just using it to make things for you. It's ours now and you can't take it. And now we're having to remember or relearn as the United States how to do a lot of these things from a supply chain side. But we're starting from far further back than we would have if we had kept and preserved a large part of that for ourselves. And the forces of higher labor costs and higher environmental regulations would have forced us to adapt and find some really interesting novel ways to automate those processes or do them more efficiently to overcome that offset of cheap labor and no environmental regulations overseas.
But now that we have the situation, I hope that we are going to be able to automate. But meanwhile, what is going to be the value of the Chinese market to not just the U.S., but to other countries if all of a sudden most of the Chinese people are going to want higher wages? So is there a certain, let's say, is there a certain peak at which point China would not really be able to compete, or rather would not be able to grow unless they would still keep the wages as low as they are right now? That's what I'm trying to figure out, because that seems to be an important part of this whole deal.
Yeah, I mean, there very much is a ceiling, right? There is a price point at which it no longer makes sense to make things in China, and the forces of capitalism, or whatever term we want to use for this odd sort of politicized capitalism we have in the U.S. At some point, and we already saw it a little bit. That was the stated intent of Trump's tariffs, was to try to reduce dependence on China and force reshoring or nearshoring activities to occur. Predictably, that's not really what happened. You started to see a lot of things, a lot of factories and sourcing starting to come online in places like Vietnam or Cambodia, Indonesia, Malaysia. But what was interesting was, for a time, we were celebrating the fact that, well, some of these factories, some of this business is leaving China, and now we're able to buy from Malaysia, or now we're able to buy from Indonesia, from the Philippines. And as it turns out, what was happening was they were shutting the factories down in China. They were removing all the manufacturing capacity in containers or on ships or whatever, setting up in those new countries. And all of a sudden you have, to some extent, Chinese laborers, but certainly Chinese foremen, factory managers, Chinese business owners, and local labor from whatever country they reshored to. And now all of a sudden they're able to take the exact same technology, the exact same products, and say, well, they're not made in China. They're not subject to the 9903, tariffs. These are exempt because they're made in Vietnam. And we didn't really do our due diligence on who these factories were. We just said, well, obviously if it's made in Vietnam, it's totally copacetic. And what we ignored was the fact that a very strong white market, gray market, and black market all developed for reshoring Chinese production, not back to the United States, but to other countries. And we just sort of began two-stepping everything. And that is, if nothing else, was certainly a failure of imagination on the part of Trump's economic advisors to not see that was probably the obvious first step. But we certainly have found in the last 18 months, really since the onset of this pandemic and the disruption of our supply chains, that's very much true. That we are seeing those factories in Vietnam or Cambodia still operate in lockstep with Chinese government goals and Chinese government parameters, and price that same way, operate the same way. And so now not only does China still have a very significant dominant manufacturing and maritime export capacity, but now they have managed to actually expand and increase their control throughout the ASEAN countries. It's been a very savvy series of geopolitical maneuvers on their part.
That sounds an awful lot like the Dutch East India Company, It sounds an awful lot like there being this very prominent imperial move to go into these countries, and not by war, not by conquest, but just by slowly setting up shop and doing business, having this transfer of power happen. But do you notice it happens on the political side as well when it comes to the countries you just mentioned right now in Southeast Asia, let's say?
I don't see it to some extent. I mean, in some countries, certainly you've began to see a lot of the political discussions and camps begin to divide along the line of to what extent should we continue to allow Chinese influence. Thailand is a great example of that, where there is an enormous push-pull dynamic within Thailand to either draw further away from China or to draw further close. Some countries are probably already lost that. Myanmar is a great example where the Chinese influence, particularly the military junta there, has more or less taken control of the country via proxy, right? It's very divided in Vietnam. I would say the preponderance of Vietnamese political focus is on cautious optimism economically with regard to China, but very much awareness of what happened in 1979, but also since then, where we've seen China's very malignant sort of gray zone activities, declaring the entire South China Sea as being their domain via the 9-dash line. And that has come at direct expense, to Vietnam and to others. So you do have this very strong undercurrent, not just suspicion, but outright antagonism towards, towards Chinese owners of businesses, factory owners, managers. But at the same time, I think there's this feeling of making a deal with the devil a little bit to continue to be able to expand market presence in the international market. Everybody's kind of convinced themselves, yeah, they're really pissed off at China, but at the same time, for the most part, we've continued to see this trend generally towards these countries allowing more and more of their own supply chains to be dictated and directed by China, if not completely 100% Chinese in terms of the personnel.
Very interesting. And we have a guest to join us here, Apex at Apex Simaps. That's APEXSIMMAPS. Apex, my friend, welcome. Thank you so much for coming in here today. So I'm curious, Apex, what your thoughts are on, if you had a chance to listen to our conversation so far, and your thoughts on China in general, what's going to be happening in the future. So go for it, my friend.
I've been well, first, thanks for having me, Lev. And hello, Huntsman. Nice to meet you.
Hey,
but I've been a little busy with work. Unfortunately, just finished a project, so I haven't really been able to listen in. But the last couple minutes that I did hear sounds in line with everything that I've heard. The idea that there are a lot of competing. There's a lot of flashpoints in the South China Sea, to put it simply. So I'm not the expert, and I'm more interested in hearing what Huntsman has to say. So I'll let him continue.
All right, absolutely. And we do have related questions, by the way, from the Prudentialist, who unfortunately cannot make it tonight, but I just want to do a quick shout out to the Prudentialist, great friend of the show, and I always appreciate when he's on. You could find him on Twitter at 2BPrudential. Anyway, one of Prudentialist's questions was, do you foresee China taking a larger role in the international trade security with its plans to expand its navy? So that kind of goes off what we were saying earlier.
Yeah, that's a hell of a good question, actually. And I would say understanding that premise is fundamental to understanding the vast majority of other maneuvers that China is currently engaged in. The Chinese Navy is not anywhere near what the United States Navy is on a per ship basis, if you're talking submarines on a per boat basis. But what they have done is fundamentally taken a completely different approach to the understanding. So we follow very much what we may call like a Mahanian view of naval power, naval supremacy. And so that's Operatarian Mayhem. That's where concepts like sea lines of communication came from in the late 1800s. And that has been the premise of American naval strategy, and thus our shipbuilding base, thus the types of weapons we've developed, the type of ships we've developed. That has influenced us for the last 120 years or so. And that's what we may loosely call like a blue water naval strategy, which is very large capital ships, like aircraft carriers, and then we surround them with very powerful escort frigates, gunships, things like that. But for the most part, everything is in service of the capital ship in the group, and then being able to, as a fleet, project force. Where China has taken a very different approach, and this is where Belt and Road very much reveals itself as a strategy of synthesis of commercial and military goals, is the expansion of commercial ports that operate as commercial ports, that are top to bottom commercial ports, but can flip a switch and in a moment be utilized in some way for military purposes. And we've seen that where China has periodically docked its submarines at places that are allegedly commercial ports. But all of a sudden a submarine pulls up to it and you're like, well, this is a commercial port. What's it doing here? But it's able to fuel, it's able to resupply, it's able to perform replenishment operations. And so what we've seen here is China's saying, well, we don't need to have 10 aircraft carriers to project force all over the world. We don't need to have massive, multi-billion-dollar carrier strike groups, treading the waters of the world in order to project force or protect Chinese interests. What we do need to have are a lot of small ships or smaller ships, and the ability to get them to and base them somewhat proximally to areas of Chinese interest. Predominantly, we're seeing that at Djibouti was the first one. It kind of shook the world up when they built a naval base at Djibouti. That's
where is Djibouti?
Sea. So it's in the Horn of Africa. It sits right at the entrance to the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which is the south part of the Red Sea. And so, of course, a lot of people don't even know where the Red Sea was, but it became very famous when a giant ship got lodged at the north end of it here back in March. So the Suez Canal is, the gateway or the pass between the Red Sea and the Mediterranean. And Suez Canal was where, of course, we saw the Ever Given get itself stuck for a couple of weeks. And then the south end of that, though, is the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. So you have Djibouti, which is a very small little country in the Horn of Africa. And then it and I believe it's Eritrea sit right across the Bab el-Mandeb from Yemen. So, and then right there's the Gulf of Aden, where we've had all the very famous piracy incidents. We had the Maersk Alabama incident where Tom Hanks was apparently the captain of a ship. And so from that's a great picture right there. So from that, what we have seen there is that they established a Navy base there ostensibly as a means of facilitating anti-piracy operations. And from that, what they've expanded into, so you see the Doralé multipurpose port there as well. I've actually got active shipments going there now. Right next door to it is a Chinese naval base. And now that Chinese naval base is not just some place where you can bring a few ships. It is capable of hosting a full-size aircraft carrier of the same size class. I believe it's their Type 003 class carrier that they've got about half built there in China. It is a super carrier. It is almost the same class or same size as our Gerald Ford class that we're still undergoing sea trials with. They're a few years behind us, but they have closed that gap very rapidly. And so what we can see with Djibouti is a bit of a prototype capability to project force outside of China's immediate littoral waters or outside of their immediate sort of scope of influence. And I believe that's the Liaoning or Shandong. I think it's the Liaoning aircraft carrier. We've seen then this desire by them to say, okay, we'll build military bases, but guess what? If it is a commercial port that is capable of berthing a ship that drafts at a certain depth, it can also serve our purposes and our needs, which is why we've seen from an economic and a military standpoint, this push of Belt and Road to acquire controlling interests or very significant minority stakes in various ports and terminals all over Europe, all over the Med, and all over the Indian Ocean, and in the United States. So it's a very interesting playbook they've been running, and it is a major threat to the United States economic interests so long as we continue to operate in this very globalized paradigm. So Djibouti was a proof of concept, but we're going to see more. We're going to continue to see a push for an Atlantic side of Africa naval base similar to Djibouti. There's a lot of speculation about where it could be. But what we've seen in the last couple of years is a significant increase in piratical activity happening in the Gulf of Guinea. So that involves countries like Guinea, Ghana, the Ivory Coast, Nigeria, Cameroon, and to the south end, Angola, which is a country that has basically sold itself out to being a vassal state of China. And Angola is importantly the gateway into Democratic Republic of Congo, which is where something like 70% of the cobalt in the world is mined. So you can see these pieces begin to kind of slowly interlock together, maybe slower than China wanted, but they are pursuing a strategy that's very fundamentally different from a Navy's perspective, but also from the way in which we as the United States consider commercial and military naval domains to be different. In the United States, the Navy protects the sea lines of communication. We protect the global commons with military force. The PLA and the PLAN, the People's Liberation Army Navy, and the CCP say that is not the approach here. It is a synthesis of the two approaches, and where one ends, the other begins, and vice versa. And we have awoken, I think, probably a little too late to that, to fully stop it. But there are still a lot of things we can do as the United States to serve our own interests economically, but also begin to mitigate or cut off at the pass some of these other strategies that we've seen through Belt and Road and a few other programs and initiatives that China's had going on around the world.
That's if we end up doing it, which we may or may not. If we were to do yes, if we were to do a what if over here, the people who are, let's say, more on the side of Donald Trump, for example, people who would even go further to make America much more of an isolated country, kind of going to the, let's say, the idea of an Arcadia that existed, back during the founding of the United States, for it to be this peaceful refuge away from all the troubles of European interfighting and all that. Obviously, that was a long time ago. But the question now is, if we were to go into this locked state, I think America is very self-sufficient, more self-sufficient than many other countries, just because of the amount of natural resources we have. That's all good in the hood, but my biggest concern is what is going to happen then? Let's say America locks in like people wanted to, and what is going to happen to not only all the other countries that are going to be around Chinese and Russian influence, let's say, but even America itself, if we're talking spans of 50 years, 100 years, all that, because I still can't imagine that just locking oneself inside and just focusing on oneself in an interconnected society would work or would not yield certain results that people may not anticipate. But again, I could be wrong, so let me know what you think.
We as the United States, as far as within a single landmass, probably have the most incredible diverse bounty of natural resources available to sustain a people anywhere on Earth. We've got abundant energy capabilities. We've got abundant lumber. We've got abundant materials to make things like concrete and cement. We have unbelievable amounts of waterways and natural resources and the ability to produce protein. So all the building blocks of life, yeah, we definitely have. Where we fall short to some extent and where we need to do better is understanding what the building blocks are for the current global economy and where we want to go. If we're going to be a spacefaring people, which Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos to one extent or another seem hell-bent on us being, I do have my theory. I think Elon Musk is an alien that wants to go home, and I think Jeff Bezos is legitimately Lex Luthor. And just
wait, I have another quick theory. Actually, this is not my theory. Yeah. This is the theory of Jason Giorgiani, but his theory is that Elon Musk wants to prove that this is all a simulation, so he wants to go to Mars and just see like what's going to happen then.
I can see that, although I grew up playing a lot of Doom, so like my whole perspective of should we inhabit Mars to some extent or another is pretty skewed. Obviously, the portal to hell is on Mars, but to the extent that very prominent, powerful interests in the United States want us to be spacefaring people, and I think we should be, if only for the scientific pursuit. I don't necessarily think we're going to destroy our own world in the next 10 years, but a lot of good has come from really trying to push the boundaries in the envelope of human exploration throughout the universe, and I love that, and I'm here for that, because humans, we can do really amazing things when we put our minds to it, particularly as Americans, because we have a constitutional and economic framework born in the Enlightenment that says natural laws is the way to be. And as long as you're within the boundaries of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, you can do these really amazing things. Now, what we have seen is our political overclass really in the last 50 years come right out and say, no, you can't, you serve our interests. And that's a separate discussion from what we notionally should be able to do versus what we practically can today, but we can tackle that differently. We do have the abundant natural resources to some extent. What we don't have, though, are abundant natural resources that are fundamental and essential to the world we live in today, to the technology that we need. We don't have all the cobalt, right? We don't have all the lithium that you need to make batteries, molybdenum, and all these others. Go right down the list of all critical and strategic materials that USGS and Department of Energy track and things like that. And we are deficient in well over half of them, to where we must import them. So we have the stuff that keeps us happy and fulfilled and satisfied at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy. But if we're going to do some really big, amazing things as a country, if we're going to continue to push the envelope of innovation from a renewables energy standpoint, from an atomic standpoint, from a new space age materials capability, then we have to identify those countries where those materials are in either extractable proportion or in abundance if we can find a way to get to them. And we have to find a way to work deals with those countries. And that's where we can't always do away. We can't do away with globalism 100%. I'd like to see America be like 70% nationalist, right, in terms of our supply chain base.
Well, do we mean globalization, or do we mean globalization or globalism? Because the two words, they sometimes people think that they mean the same thing.
Different.
At least my definition of globalism has been the swindling that's been going on of a lot of jobs that otherwise could have remained in the country. You know, if we're not talking about again, well, I'm not going to get into that part of it so much. I do want to say though that I did see a 4chan thread, and you know how very smart and astute a lot of the 4chan people are. So I saw a 4chan thread talking about the possibility of building a space elevator and how something like that would solve so many of our problems. If we're talking about mining asteroids, if we're talking about creating a solar panel on that elevator that's going to really quickly bring the energy down to the earth. And at least the post itself seemed to be very excited about this prospect and was almost like, why is nobody talking about this? Why is nobody making a big deal? And they even broke down like how much it would cost and all that, and it would cost way less than a lot of the wars that we were in and all that. So I don't know. Any thoughts? I mean, this may be totally out of your purview, but just in case, any thoughts on space elevators?
As far as like a physical machine or construct that will enable us to take assets here all the way. And I think if we could do such a thing, it would be so vulnerable to attack or to sabotage. The country that figures out how to do that first is then going to find out, you know, you're talking about a single fixed physical thing that is vulnerable to all. I mean, we can't even secure our energy pipelines, you know, for transmission of gas and refined fuel products in the US. If we create a massive, gigantic capability here in the US to send things at extremely low cost and high speeds from the ground all the way up to outer space, there is no way a war is not going to be fought over that technology 5 days after we cut the ribbon on it. Right.
Wow.
Because it's just the implications of that are simply too profound. I have a very cynical view from a geopolitical standpoint that if you come up with something that is such an incredible first mover advantage that you could build an entire global walled garden economically around it and around that technology, there is no way in which that technology is not going to be stolen, iterated, or fought over almost immediately. So if you're going to see that a technology like that exists, and I'm not a physicist, right? Like, I mean, I'm barely a functioning English speaker half the time, but from a supply chain, from a geopolitical perspective, history teaches us very quickly that next generation weapons or next generation technologies are extremely quickly targeted for espionage. They're targeted for theft, or you have to find a way to make that technology available to as many stakeholders as possible. And so you distribute the risk of attack, you distribute the risk of, you know, malign self-interest against it. And that's really about what you can do. Because there's no way America figures out how to build a space elevator and the rest of the world's going to sit around and go, yeah, we'll let you reap the benefits of that for 50 years until we figure it out ourselves. Right. It's going to come to a pretty fast loggerheads.
Well, there was a comment earlier on from Lisa Bode. Does Lev really think they will allow us to get almost free energy? LMAO, work hard for that petrol, baby. I mean, that is the other concern that people have today, that if there was some kind of free energy, not only what you were saying, which I think is very valid, but also people would, black box that shit in an instant because so much money is at stake. But that may be very conspiratorial of me. How right do you think Lisa is?
To the extent that we're able to develop game-changing, so the question is really about fundamentally, are we going to be stuck with, legacy fuel, legacy energy, legacy sort of systems for powering our world, right? Versus things that in a lot of ways set us free from the natural resources we're currently locked in from a fossil fuel perspective.
Yeah, like the Tesla Tower, for example, back in the day that was thought of. And again, it was thought of by the guy who we have to thank for having all the electricity in the first place. So I wouldn't necessarily, call him a fringe figure.
I think it was David Bowie that played him in the Prestige or whatever, right? So I like that. I like that portrayal of Tesla more than the kind of the pencil mustache guy. But
yeah,
no, I mean it's a lot of things that are viable, a lot of things that are possible, a lot of things that we should do, right? In order to increase individual human freedom, in order to provide a better world for ourselves, for our families, for our communities, for our countries, will not get done. Will not get done because of the practical limitations of human avarice, human selfishness, the simple belief by some people in the world that it is not possible to have game-changing technologies and not immediately exploit that for profit or power. And a lot of times the kind of people who are able to push the envelope, think about Tesla. Tesla was in many ways a very humble man. He was phenomenally brilliant, but he was extremely naive about power. And so the two things we remember about Tesla is that he lived at the very edges, well beyond the edges of human innovation and understanding of the mechanics of the world. And at the same time, the other thing we remember about Tesla is that he was bullied, is that he was brought to heel by Thomas Edison, that his technologies were so far ahead of their time that not the visionaries of the day, but the powerful people of the day were able to co-opt him and were able to put him into a box and turn him into, if not a laughingstock, certainly marginalize the contributions he could have made to society in his day. And that in a lot of ways is the story of human history. At the time we realized the things that we don't trade for, we fight for. If you can't operate from an abundance mentality, if you can't see that there is always a win for everybody involved, or if you find yourself in a situation where realistically there really is no win, it really is zero sum, either I have to have it or you have to have it, you're going to end up in a situation where conflict is the inevitable outcome. There has to be a settling of scores, or there has to be a resolution to the dispute. And as brilliant as Tesla was, as much as we probably would be living in a much better world today if his innovations had been given room to grow and blossom and expand, he was held back and humanity was held back by the short-minded people of the day that said, no, we're going to put this in a box and we're going to limit this to the extent that we can manipulate it for our own power. If we can't figure out how to do that, then we're going to go with a next best alternative that we can control. And we saw that with the fact that we, America had a very large electrified rail, not rail, but like light trolley car system in a number of cities.
Who Framed Roger Rabbit? Who Framed Roger Rabbit explained all of that. Yeah. One of my favorite movies.
That's what we saw. It's a fantastic movie, man. It's
Jessica Rabbit. I mean, come on.
It's funny how we've seen some of these really absurd science fiction or comedy, type films. I think in a lot of ways explain our world far better than the very serious, pondersome academic stuff. But
well, I could give you a quick example there with Tesla even.
Please.
In his biography written by a longtime friend of Tesla's from childhood days, one of the things written there was how he used to breathe in and out and how he started having sensations in the spine. Now, for all the BTR veterans out there are probably sick of hearing me talk about Kundalini, but since Huntsman here is new to the show, and I really am enjoying this conversation very much, but since you're new to the show, I usually talk about similar experiences that I personally have when it comes to this electrical energy going up and down my spine when I breathe. And if we read a lot of these old mystic texts, or even new mystic texts, whatever, like they talk about the same process of breathing in, out, having this electric energy come up, and that is the transmutation of the human mind into a higher state of consciousness that prompts with it, again, in my personal experience, various visions, various three-dimensional things being viewed. Even more intensely when you're in a half-dream space, but even when you just meditate with the lights off, you end up seeing a lot of interesting things. Nikola Tesla always described seeing the visions before putting them into the proper work. And I want to tie this to a quote that he said before about if you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. The biggest problem, though, is that the New Age movement, whatever the hell you want to call it, full of those stupid hippies, I think that's been such a black mark on the possibility of what could be done here, because a lot of them take drugs, a lot of them go to Burning Man, a lot of them seem to waste the opportunity they have to actually apply this in such a way as to as to create the Ubermensch, or whatever you want to call it. But one last thing that I want to touch on, because I don't want to go all hippy-dippy on you here, and I want Apex to also get a word in edgewise, is have you heard about that, the former, what's his name here, Haim Eshed, the former head of Israel's Defense Ministry's Space Directorate, talked about that there's this galactic federation and how we're not ready to be a part of it yet, how we have a deal to do various experiments. And from that point of view, it's a very different reality than the one we're used to here on the regular real world as we conceive it. Because this reality basically says that since World War II, not just Operation Paperclip, but various other things have been going on behind the scenes that we are not aware of when it comes to what's actually going on the moon, what's actually going on Mars, and we are just given a bread and circus equivalent of these rich billionaires going up into space for a little bit and then going down and jumping up and down in victory. But in comparison to what I just said right now, that is nil. That is nothing. So I don't know what your personal take is on various black projects and various things that may have been kept out of the books, and what exactly, when it comes to a lot of these things, what exactly are the protocols? Is it possible to keep certain things? And yeah, we could say that there are certain whistleblowers that have come out, but again, they all get labeled, with the tinfoil hat. But how easy would you say it is for certain things to be so compartmentalized in our current world for something like that to actually be a reality? Because this guy's like 80-something years old. He's very well respected. I don't think he necessarily needs to play the jester here. So I don't know. It's an interesting thing, but let me know what you think.
To the extent that black box projects exist, I tend to assume the vast majority of them are directed towards far less almost spiritual goals, right? Most people who are concerned with power, most people who are concerned with wealth, are not concerned with spiritual ascension, enlightenment, the esoteric things of the universe. I tend to believe that most people operate from fairly base needs or base desires, however they dress it up.
Based in red-pilled desires.
Yeah, go on. So, right?
Yeah.
So I think to the extent that we have poured billions of dollars into all these alleged black box projects, by and large, if there are alien spacecraft currently hiding out at Nellis Air Force Base, adjacent to Area 51, if they're at an hour away from where I'm sitting here at Wright-Patt Air Force Base, to the extent that we're trying to adopt and manipulate those technologies, it's not so we become a spacefaring people. It's so we can build like way faster, more durable jets and missiles to blow each other up with, right? Mm-hmm. I think that's largely how it functions from a political level. And it functions that way to some extent from a corporate and capitalist level too, because if you come up with the next great world-beating technology, notionally, you're the next trillionaire, right? You're the next guy whose name is going to be sung throughout history. And those are very base motives. my sense is that at some point, and I don't really know when it happened, but human beings, at some point, we crawled out of the caves and we looked up to the sky and we said, there is a story to be told. There's a story to be told. And we began to assign value to the things around us, not just value of, if I eat this, it kills me. If I eat this, it heals me. If I eat this, it makes me feel better. If I kill this animal, I can wear its skin and stay warm. If I rub these things together, I can make fire. At some point, we began to assign value and meaning to the universe around us, to the tangible and the intangible things. And and for a long time, I think the arc of human history was, yes, survival, but also how do we achieve some measure of self-actualization and some measure of the same thing, but at a tribal scale. And the more the world became commercialized, the more we began to manipulate objects in our hands and manipulate one another. And we built supply chains up, and we built up political systems, and we built up monetary systems, and we built up ways of making war more effectively on one another. We stopped looking at the sky and saying, what is out there that I am a part of? What is out there that is more real and bigger and in a sense more spiritual than the things that I can hold in my hands and manipulate? And today, I believe there still is in almost everybody a desire to utilize the tools and resources and ideas available to them in their immediate sphere of thought or grasp, and try to make their world a little bit better for themselves and for the people they care about, and in some ways the ideological constructs they care about. But we, by and large, live in a paradigm or in a society or in a global society, as it were, that the means of production, the means of facilitating our needs, the means of creating things of value that fulfill ourselves and fulfill one another are not controlled by people who have that maybe higher order desire, or they don't recognize it in themselves because they've long ago abandoned that childlike hope. Like, I want to go to space because I want to see really, really, really cool things, right? Like, I want to see in my lifetime I want to see a human being be able to like visit another planet and legitimately set up shop there, right? So I'm all about, if Elon wants to go to Mars, great. Let's build the technology to do that, because even if we fail that, we're going to build some really cool stuff that we can use here for ourselves.
Definitely.
I'm all about that.
I mean, I doubt
but a lot of other people want to do that simply because they can make more money.
I mean, I doubt we're alone in the universe. I think there are other beings out there very similar to us who live on other planets, just from the vast size of it, as well as just the human form. Very different from the animal form, even though we are animals at the end of the day. But I do see it as different just in terms of we can't really survive outside of building a shelter for ourselves, while all the other animals seem very much suited to whatever environment they happen to be in. But be that as it may, I do want to get to Apex. And but right before I get to Apex, just this may be a little bit of a haunting thing later on when we get Jason Giorgiani on. He's going to talk about this with us. It's pretty, again, I don't really know what to make of it right now. I'm not going to put my foot down and say I believe this or not, but it's very interesting that certain things out there, like Admiral Byrd, who was in the Navy, I believe, U.S. Navy, and took that exploratory mission over to Antarctica. This is where, let's say, the more conspiratorial side of the internet, the schizo side of the internet, whatever you want to call it, it ends up coming to a very interesting conclusion that this was no exploratory mission, Operation High Jump, that this was actually Americans trying to destroy the Nazis who were stationed in Antarctica. And again, like, I know all of this sounds ridiculous, in case you never heard of it before. I completely understand, and I don't know what to make of it either, but the idea there is, like, a lot of those advanced craft that people have seen going under the water and all that, like the Navy recently had that video that came out about a year ago, I believe. All of that was written about in newspapers back in the 40s, 50s. You had the Battle of Los Angeles. You had the Foo Fighters over I think, the White House during the 50s. So a lot of these things, to me, like, if we were to take this frame of, yes, the Nazis are still around, and they're in Antarctica and God knows where else, and they're the ones who end up having these spacecrafts, it's almost like looking at the situation we have in China right now, like a mini version of that, where we are concerned about what the Chinese are doing with their craft, but something like that that, again, I'm not going to bring out a whole essay here to prove that this is what's happening. I have no idea, but from the little bits and pieces that get scattered around the internet, it is a very interesting thing to think about if we think about the world in that perspective, the perspective of there being some kind of a breakaway civilization that decided to discard the notion of having anything to do with the nonsense that's going on our world right now. It's a different frame of mind to have. So I don't know if you've personally ever had that frame of mind. I don't want to dwell on this too long. Apex has been waiting long enough. But if there's any short thing that you would want to add just in relation to that, because it's very out of left side. It's very weird. I completely understand it. But it is something that's on the mind of a lot of people who are online right now, who are trying to find out what exactly is the truth, what exactly is going on.
Mm-hmm. I think that the truth is often more mundane than we want it to be. And the problem with mundane is that for some people, right, it's just how they live. It's how it is. If there is a breakaway civilization and they inhabit a world of their own choosing, even if they're within the same sort of terrestrial realm we are, right? But they fundamentally live within their own little world, and they're happy, then I think we should do everything we could just to leave them the hell alone.
Well,
we've got like our own crap to resolve, right?
Yes.
Now, if it is a malignant breakaway civilization that is plotting and scheming, we probably need to understand what that is too.
According to Giorgiani, he thinks that the end goal is to reduce the Earth to a state of agriculture, so that we don't reach the singularity. But that's a whole other thing. So in that case, that's bad news. Bad news coming from this breakaway civilization, but whatever.
Well, in that case, we're worried about like the whole concept of like Ropus Basilisk or whatever, right? So at some point, is the singularity going to be self-aware enough to go back in time and kill us?
Who knows?
Right? So,
but anyway,
that doesn't happen.
I hope that doesn't happen either. Oh, and also the quote from Ashed here, the Israeli guy mentioned, they have been waiting until today for humanity to develop and reach a stage where we will understand in general what space and spaceships are. Referring to the Galactic Federation. So again, who knows if that's true? It's an interesting thing. At least it's something for us to work towards, like you said. But anyway, there was this quote from Clockwork Orange going to Apex now. What sort of a world is it at all? Men on the moon and men spinning around the earth, and there's no attention paid to earthly law and order no more. That's from the bum there who was beat up by Alex and his droogs in Clockwork Orange. Great movie, by the way. Highly recommended. But to that subject,
it's very eye-opening.
It is, yes. But to that subject of what is going on the Earth today.
Come on, you missed the joke. You gotta.
Wait, what is the joke? Hold on.
Oh,
man. That just flew right past me. That flew right past me. Oh, man. By the way, everybody, subscribe right now. All the people who are watching this, all the people who came here from the Huntsman, first of all, let me know who you are in the chat, and I welcome you to BTR. We bring people together. We are different from any of the other live streams out there, and I think, Huntsman, you could see that yourself. Anyway, Apex, thank you. When it comes to the people who are here on the Earth, a lot of the complaints that people have here when it comes to the Biden administration, when it comes to what is happening with inflation, what is happening in general with the culture of the United States, what I also see happening is people leaning on more authoritarian regimes, more, let's say, based in trad-pilled regimes as the solution to our problem. And I have never hid the fact that, to me, that's a very dangerous precedent to set, because none of the people, I'm sure, who are making a lot of these comments know what it's like to live in an actual authoritarian regime. But I'm curious, Apex, since you've been within this circle for a long time, just of people who have had, and I'm not saying that you have the same ideas, but in general, I think you've been exposed to a lot of these same conversations. Can you maybe say it in a different way than I said, or say anything that I may be missing here on what exactly is driving people to adopt such views, And also, do you think that they're right? Do you think that this may be something that's going to happen? Not the perfect thing, but like the best of all possibilities when it comes to this system's not working, it's failing. The only thing that'll be able to revive it is some kind of a dictatorship. So I don't know. Apex, go ahead, my friend.
Well, I think that, in a very similar way to the theme that you and Huntsman's conversation on China has been, is there you saw a lot of kind of stepping back and almost just very basic power theorizing, trying to really, I mean, you're looking at a group that's going, why have we kept losing for 50 years? I mean, that's really what these groups are asking themselves. And I think that there are legitimate concerns about institutions, and then there's, utopian pie in the sky. If everyone just agrees with me, everything will go perfectly and blah, blah, blah. So I think that part of this is starting on that first half, part of it is a legitimate concern, is looking at the procedures and the institutions and asking, what do they actually lead to beyond just what they claim to. That I've written about this pretty extensively. Is there's and I the thing I wrote today was basically like this. There's an awareness of kind of a collective failure on the institutional part, and part of that is there's no accountability. There's no recourse to any kind of who is in charge. Who do I one of the greatest tragedies of today is it's not even clear who exactly I'm supposed to blame. Is it the president? Is it Congress? Is it who are the elites? Like you hear all these big they're capitalized words, so they look official and everything, but what these are people, and they're somewhere, and they're but no one appears to have any awareness of who they are. And I think that there's a general feeling of frustration and apathy that very quickly can accelerate from what I'll call a dispassionate analysis of power into a very ideological, almost proclamation, where an analysis starts reading like a manifesto more than anyone else. I think that it really depends on what exactly we're talking about, but that kind of frustration is really what I see. And I won't quibble about the definitions of what counts as authoritarian or freedom or whatever. But I do think that there's legitimate concerns, there's legitimate analysis. But when people shift from, okay, let's analyze what the procedure of democracy does, for instance, how does it interface with inequalities in power between actors in society? How does it interface with a small group of people controlling the narratives that other people see, versus, if you just come into my based and trad Christian state, everything is going to be perfect. And both of those kinds of discussions end up occupying the same space. And so, as with any other movement, if you can call it a movement, it's weird trying to identify a movement in a purely digital space. But if you can identify it as a movement, it has what I'll just say are more serious actors and less serious actors. So, if you have a particular segment of it that you'd like to go into more depth on, I'm happy to share my experiences with that.
Well, Huntsman, what do you think?
To the extent that the world is, I would say observably so, bifurcated really from a organization and from a functioning standpoint between the haves and the have-nots. maybe the capable and the culpable, the elites and the non-elites, the cloud people and the mud people, right? Whatever dichotomy you want to fall along.
The Eloi or
to
the
help.
Morlocks.
Exactly right. It's I think we have a lot of ways for framing what is probably a natural output of a world where increasingly the resources that we utilize to define our own experience in the world are able to be consolidated and controlled by a relatively small group of people. And we I think that the motives are such that, well, there must be this very elite cabal and they're in the castle of 10,000 points, or what is a million points a ladder, whatever George H.W.'s frame for it was, right? So to the extent that we think that the Illuminati and the Freemasons and everybody else have taken over the world, maybe that's very possible, right? A lot of things are possible that may or may not be true. What I think drives that, and what I think the focus needs to be, is on how do we utilize the systems that we have available to us today, the frameworks we have available to us today, to, with as little disruption as possible to our own lives and to the lives of those we love, undo the influence that order has on us and in our personal lives, and create new systems and new capabilities, or older systems and capabilities that are rooted in an ideology that serves individual human freedom and serves the freedom of those we love. How do we break away from that? And so at the end of the day, I don't really care why the elites do what they do, because I can't stop them. And their motives are largely irrelevant. At the end of the day, there's power and there's not power. And to the extent that I can take power back for myself, to the extent that I can be a tool or a way to, and a lot of people would agree I'm just a tool in general, so I've been called that like way more than, but to the extent that I could be I would say a functional tool that is helpful to others, that's what I choose to do. It's one of the reasons I really love America. We have had our very serious bouts with extremely anti-humanistic behaviors, with viewing other humans as chattel, as assets that can be worked to death, that can be bought and sold. And that's not okay. And so whether it's white people, black people, brown people, polka dot people, whatever it may be, the whole spectrum of human experience, to the extent that people have been subjugated by the United States, every single one of those is outside the boundaries of what I consider to be the ethos and the spirit on which we were founded, which is codified in the Declaration of Independence in our Constitution. And we've made changes that we've need to make to perfect to perfect this grand experiment and things. But at the same time, we haven't always used that power for good. And my goal, the thing that what I live for today as a 37-year-old, and the thing that I'll die, hopefully at like 100 years old, having accomplished or having advanced the ball in some way further, is away from rule of the common man by the elites, by the overclass, by those who say that my life and your life and the life of others only has value to the extent that I subscribe to their version of moral duties, that I subscribe to their version of what I'm allowed or not allowed to do, as long as I don't hurt people. I'm supposed to subscribe to this paradigm of people and systems have value only to the extent that somebody says they do. I don't believe that. I think that every one of us is born equal in rights. I think every one of us is born equal to some extent in spirit and desire to do the right thing for ourselves, fundamentally. But I think most people are born with the spirit and desire to do right by themselves and by others. I don't think humans are fundamentally broken. I don't think we're morally bankrupt at the time of birth. I think to a large extent we learn to be that way.
Well, the system that was developed here in the U.S., from what I understand, it was looking at people as very fallen creatures, where I think it was the expectation that there's going to be a lot of problems, that you may vote somebody into the White House that a lot of people are not going to like, yet still the system functions. And that's kind of a test for today. Are we at any breaking point, or are we repeating other things? Like I was reading before about the Sedition Act that was passed by Woodrow Wilson, in which people could just get arrested by, talking smack about the press, by talking smack about the war and all that. So to me, that is a big example of history repeating itself, and not even to that much of an extent. Like, we still see echoes of it right now, but the reason why I bring that up is we have had a lot of talk about how everything's going downhill. That's the only thing that would kind of bring up to say, like, wait a minute, like, we've been through this before. I'm not saying it's wonderful what we have right now, by no means, but I just don't know when it comes to solving a lot of these problems, how exactly would it be solved? Because the point that a lot of people are bringing up from more of the reactionary side is that they cannot be solved with any liberal ideology, and in favor of that, they would want to oppose a dictatorship to solve those problems for them, because they don't see any way that a liberal ideology would solve it. The only thing that I would kind of offer, not really to their defense, but it was a quote. I know that you are a fan of Dune, and that there was a quote from Dune which goes as follows. Let's see over here. When I am weaker than you, I ask you for freedom because that is according to your principles. When I am stronger than you, I take away your freedom because that is according to my principles. So if that may be what we're dealing with right now, as far as, various leftist or corporatist elements that have a strong control over what goes on, people assume the only way to solve it would be a very tight-fisted approach. They are looking at various leaders and excusing them, including Xi Jinping, excusing them because in a way that they see a strong leader as being the only way to solve all of these different greedy interests that are currently, taking this country. I don't hold that view, but I'm trying to find out what exactly can be done to not go down that direction and to be able to preserve a lot of the things that we do like about this country.
I think we have a very interesting complex of political philosophies emerging in the United States. And I think that's a natural output of the evolutionary pressure that we've been under as individuals to try to find some way to explain the absolute madness that we've all experienced in the last 20 years. Like, I'm watching the chat here go through my screen, and there's concepts about like millennials and boomers and stuff like that. And I think it's even bigger than that. Humans fundamentally are wired in two really unusual ways. We are wired for self-interest, and we are also a eusocial species. Not to the extent that ants and honeybees and things like that are, but we are eusocial in the sense that we are wired at some level to engage in cooperative pursuits towards mutual interest. And in pursuing our own individual interest, we also gravitate towards finding systems and parameters that we can operate under that allow us to connect at some level to the self-interest of others, right? And then the rest of human history is that tension of how do we solve that? So the one end of that paradigm is pure, in my view, pure democratic, what would be called democracy, which is one man, one vote, regardless of anything. And I think that's a recipe for chaos and madness. Because we're very familiar with the bell curve, and it's been much debated over from an IQ standpoint, but to what extent observation has led us to say generally the concept is true that there is a very large class of people that are semi-capable or somewhat capable broadly, within very specific domains can be extremely capable. Then out here you have outliers to one side who are outliers in like their own stupidity, whether malignant or unintentional. You have outliers in terms of brilliance and capability and capacity, and some of them are malignant, use it for wrong ends. Some of them use it for very beneficent ends, but by and large, we all live in the middle. And so we have tried to resolve this dilemma by saying, what is the way in which we can maximize the half of us that wants to pursue whatever the hell we want for our own self-interest? And the other half is how do we learn how to get along and cooperate, right? So on the one end, you have everybody has a choice, everybody has a rule, but what we know is that there's going to be enough brilliant people and enough idiots to skew decision making, probably in a way that does not benefit the whole. The other end is let's concentrate all the power and all the rule in the will of one human being, or in a very, very small elite class of human beings. And I think the hope is for a lot of traditionalists, a lot of the reactionary, neo-reactionary crowd, a lot of people that maybe to some extent subscribe to Evola or, Nietzsche with his concept of the Übermensch and some of these other things. You see a lot of people today that say, you know what, we tried the will of the people. We tried to have a representative democracy, a republic, right? And it all went to hell. We screwed it up for ourselves. And so let's try this other thing. And the issue with that, though, is that on the one hand, if everybody is equal, if everybody is special, right? If everybody is treated in such a way that the expectation is that the outcome will always be equitable across the board, you will never get fully equitable treatment because we are fundamentally different. But if you hope for a guy, I don't care if it's Donald Trump, I don't care if it's Adolf Hitler, I don't care if it's some avatar of beneficent monarchy, whatever it may be, but if the plan is to concentrate the ability to fulfill the will of all of these people and their needs and their wants and their various divergent value systems, and you want to concentrate all that decision-making authority and capability into one guy or into one very small sort of Mandarin class, you're also setting yourself for a recipe for disaster because they have human wills. They have human needs and requirements. And so what you will never get this perfect statesman, this perfect beneficent king who is capable of making the right decisions for all of us. You will never get a perfect concentration of humanity who are capable of making decisions that rationally balances their own emotional needs and wants with the benefit of the collective. And so we live somewhere in the middle in terms of these are really the range of options that we have to deal with. And one of the reasons I really love America is I think that fundamentally, it was the best attempt we've yet come up with, and maybe we can be better. Maybe we can do it a little better. But fundamentally, it was the best attempt we had at least to balance those two extremes and to say, how do we give people the ability at scale to determine and dictate their will, but also create pockets of innovation where things can be done right, things can be done wrong, but at least we learn from them and we continue to sort of fail forward and iterate forward as a society in the right direction towards serving the needs of everybody. We got off track almost immediately after the signing of the Constitution, and the whole thing has been a desire to get back to, a desire to evolve and iterate in that direction. But if we set that as our lodestar, if we set that as the point, all these other practical things, and I'm not an expert in all that stuff, right? I'm not an expert in finance. I'm not an expert in human health and medicine, all this other stuff. But I do think at least the fundamental mechanisms that we try to resolve these issues are commerce and war. And I don't like war. I don't want to see people die. Friends of mine have died in the last 20 years. I think we all know at least somebody from a first party perspective or somebody whose family was completely upended by the devastation of 20 years of conflict in the Middle East and in Central Asia. Did we have to do it? Maybe we thought we did then. We look back and we say, probably not. We don't know what that butterfly effect is, but we do know the tangible effects in our lives have been. War sucks. Sometimes it's moral. Rarely, though, is it moral. Mostly it's in pursuit of, we think we're doing the right thing, but we're not doing the right thing because we take our eye off the ball that human life and liberty is the most important thing. It's what we're all here for. And so if we set war aside as a viable tool, we're left with how do we meet our needs commercially in a way that sort of rationally squares the circle of our ridiculous needs, our ridiculous wants, but our ability to also get along and function together. And that's where I think refocusing a little bit around the ways in which we manufacture, the ways in which we conduct ourselves on a global scale and within our own country, the ways in which we resolve our needs commercially in the most rational way to where the maximum number of people possible feel that their needs and wants are met. That's probably the best common ground we can get to without totally giving ourselves over to mob rule or totally concentrating all the power in the hands of a few people. Maybe the first king would do a great job. Maybe even the second king if his daddy taught him to be a good king. But by the third generation, the fourth generation, the fifth generation, the trappings of power start to corrupt. And
Well,
so we find ourselves in a situation. How do we kind of stay in that middle where the least number of people are impacted negatively by
well,
whatever system we occupy?
a couple of things here. I thought that was really well said, and I would love Apex's response as well. But a couple of things. There was a comment over there from Godward podcast. I guess that is somebody who wants to get closer to God, and I think that that is a beautiful thing, as I'm sure it is for you, Godward. But his comment was that things would be different if we were ruled by our own people. Take that like however you want. But the idea there is that, at least in my perspective, we're not living in an island anymore. We're not living in the Middle Ages. We're not even living, in the 1700s, where things are not as connected as they are today. With connection comes capital, comes banking, comes all of these modern things, for good or for ill. And the problem, as I see it, is that no matter who it is, because I think that any gap of power that's going to exist, whether it's a gap of power in terms of territories on the world, or if it's a gap of power in terms of there is a job out there to do a certain thing that's probably going to exploit some people, it's probably going to create havoc and chaos down the road. And you know what? Just because everybody looks like everybody else, nobody's going to do that job. In an interconnected society, nobody's going to seize that opportunity. I find that to be completely ridiculous, and that is the primary thing that I want to bring up whenever those kind of points get thrown in, because I really don't see how you are going to be able to prevent that kind of thing, again, unless you're living in a totally isolated, island or planet or whatever, where there's been this very strict religious rule for a long time and everybody's on the same page, or unless you're living in the Satya Yuga. Satya means truth, where everybody's just psychic and can tell whatever every person's thinking, like that is really the only scenario where I see something like that working, either going back or either you want to go back 300 years ago, or you want to go back, 100,000 years ago, back during Atlantis or whatever. But, if we're talking about going to a scenario where this is going to work, I just don't see it. But anyway, that was just a quick aside to address that. But also, when it comes to what you were bringing up about the dictators, I mean, this is what I always talk about on BTR. I think it does relate to Xi Jinping getting rid of the term limits for himself. And one other thing to bring up here, and I do have comments over here from my CIA handler. I have some comments of questions to ask you. But yeah, and people were also like, you probably saw the chat earlier. I'm sure half of them think that you're a CIA agent. So that's just want to bring that out there as well. Here's the thing: everybody who's going to be on the show who's against anything that happens with China, or who's like more in a, anybody who has pictures of themselves in sunglasses, they're going to think automatically this guy's, wired up. But anyway, just want to throw that out there as well, because I listen to the chat and the chat should listen to me as well. Anyway, that being aside, yes. No, I'm gonna throw the gauntlet down. Anyway, when we're talking about people staying in this permanent state, kind of like Joseph Stalin. From what I understand, what ended up happening in the USSR at that time, and I am originally from the USSR. I was born in St. Petersburg, Russia in 1988. So anyway, what ended up happening around that time of Stalin, and my grandma was born in 41, so she just like barely remembers it. But anyway, what ended up happening during that time is Stalin started getting more and more paranoid. He started slicing off various people who got into certain positions. So if you were going to go work for the NKVD, as it was called at the time, then it was KGB, now it was FSB. But when you were working there, you kind of knew that your head was going to be on the chopping block pretty soon. And that doesn't mean you're getting fired. That means you're getting fired at. So when it comes to the people who took those jobs, they already knew, but they couldn't say no either, because they'd get killed as well. So it's a very interesting thing that happened when it comes to who are the people that end up surviving. Khrushchev survived, and he acted like the fool for a long time, which may have been how he ended up surviving. Mostly the people that end up surviving in these kind of things are going to, like I said in the beginning of the stream, they're going to kiss your ass, they're going to tell you whatever you want to hear. Same thing with the people who were telling Mao, that everything's going great, there aren't any famines, all that kind of stuff. So the last thing that I want to touch on there before I bring it to Apex, and we also have Remus, the great Remus, joining us as well. But anyway, hello, Remus. Please shut off the laptop or whatever, because there's sound coming from there. Everybody,
Yeah, no,
oh, okay. Everybody, subscribe right now. So anyway, the point that I'm getting to there is not even the paranoia of Stalin. The point is that during that time, there were people who, scientists who were given caviar, who were given all kinds of goodies in order to produce the atom bomb or something like it, in order to produce weaponry that would be very advantageous for the USSR to hold. Most of the things, from what I understand, that they got were from the Americans. Sometimes Americans just willingly gave it to them, or sometimes, they just stole various technology as was going on through the Cold War. But as far as the fire in one's belly, as far as the thumos to be able to produce these advanced technologies, from what I understand, there was not really that much there. And I don't think it was the matter that the scientists in Russia were stupid. I think that they were really brilliant people. But I wonder if there is a change of incentive that happens under a dictatorship versus under the kind of climate that America had. And yes, you could say like the German Nazi scientists, okay, fine, Operation Paperclip, I get it. But if we're specifically talking about the environment that was happening in Soviet Russia at the time, it did not produce great technology. It did not produce people that were willing to put in the time to develop something extraordinary, no matter how pampered they got. So the reason I'm bringing that up is I wonder, do you think that there's going to be a similar thing that's going to happen with China if the stagnation would start from just having somebody in power never leaving?
My greatest fear, I guess, from a national security standpoint for the U.S. is that China does figure that out, right? That somehow the business class and the political class and the warrior class all find ways to get along. To this point, the CCP has kind of sort of figured it out, not in any sort of moral or ethical or way that's beneficent to humanity. But to a certain extent, and we saw it with the Soviets, is that fear is a remarkable driver of cohesion and of unified forward action to some extent. But its greatest weakness is also that it breeds a very sort of quiet dissension, and you can only keep that under wraps for so long. And China faces two things that I'm betting long term hamper their ability to really step forward and dominate the world in the same way that the United States has to. I think we've left Pax Americana, but for that time, that sort of 50 to 60 years post World War II, right up until the War on Terror, where the U.S. was kind of sort of the beneficent hegemon of the world, to the extent we weren't doing terrible things elsewhere, which we continue to do in a lot of places. But by and large, there was an era of somewhat stability that was brought about by United States, Soviets, everything kind of rolled up under one of those two things, or was at least defined by the opposition or connection to one of those two spheres. And I think that's what China is aiming for here. China doesn't want a unipolar world. They don't want to be the only power, because so much of their power and so much of their current financial capability and so much of the importance of the CCP as what I consider sort of a transnational criminal organization is derived from the economic benefits that come from being connected to the United States and being connected to the consumptive appetites of the West. And I think they understand that. In the United States, we need to find a way to iterate ourselves, I think, moving forward, and say, okay, it's not a unipolar world anymore, but we can have a regime that's built on coercion. We cannot have a regime that's built on fear, because like with the Soviet Union, that's how you stifle innovation. The Soviet Union was never a great economic power in the sense of being able to convince people to cooperate with them on the basis of trade. Everything was fear-based. And Russians are notorious for building like really reliable, really good weapons, right? If the M16, or what we now, sort of the AR-15 platform, is very representative of American engineering and the way in which we view the world, the AK-47 very much is a product of the Soviet mentality, which is it's cheap, it works, I can bury it in the sand for 20 years, pull it out, and it's probably still going to go bang when I pull the trigger. And it's a question of tolerances, it's a question of capabilities, it's a question of what the thing was even designed to do. And so that sort of that communist mentality was build it cheap enough that it works, but build it cheap enough that we can scale it fast and kick a whole bunch of units out, right? Stalin, I think, was the one that said quantity has a quality all of its own. That's very different than what you want in a capitalist or economic paradigm where individuals want things that work for them. And to the extent that it doesn't work, they want to be able to cheaply replace it. And that's where I think China has got it more right than the Soviets. But at the same time, the very severe limiting power factor is the extent to which power is wielded against the people who actually have to make this stuff. And I think if you repress the people long enough, if you don't provide at some level for their needs and their desire for upward mobility and their desire to better themselves than where they're at today, if you don't provide for that, then you're going to find yourself in a situation where one day they're standing outside the palace with torches and pitchforks, and there's not a thing you can do because the generals have abandoned you. The guys to push buttons on missiles, launch systems, have abandoned you. And then a new thing comes into play. And so we find ourselves in this very interesting moment in history where I think the Westphalian order has largely begun its collapse, because the end state of the Westphalian order has been this hyper interdependence, this hyper globalization. We have all spread ourselves too thin so that a contagion that weakens the global system, as we've seen with the pandemic, and not really the pandemic, but our reaction to the pandemic, the ways in which we have declared this to be a pandemic and said, let's disrupt the ways in which we cooperate on a trade basis and a political basis, on a financial basis, and everybody take a different approach. Everybody just do whatever they want. And China stepped forward and said, we're going to continue to dominate. But I think they've expended themselves too far. And from the United States standpoint, I think if we just say, look, what are the ways in which we can bring this thing back, utilize the power that we have as free people, more or less free people. We're not really free, but we're more free than most people throughout human history have been. But utilize that power of self-interest and the paradigm that we're able to operate under to create things of value for one another. If we find a way to do that, if we find a way to scale food systems back and decentralize risk, decentralize energy, decentralize all these things and say, let's break away from this idea that one tiny little sphere of power and capital can concentrate and centralize and distribute down everything we need, we will survive long after, as a country, if we can do that, long after the CCP is overthrown and taken to the streets and dealt with like tyrants and dictators tend to be dealt with. But if we can't get to that state, then what I think we're going to continue to see is this cancer eat both us and China alive, while the rest of the world tries to figure out what to do as they begin this period of sort of durable disorder that follows from the great powers collapsing or rotting from the inside out. Because I think that's the decision point we're really at right now that will determine what the next quarter century to half century probably looks like for most of the people of the world.
That was really well said. I want to go to Apex for either a response to that or what we talked about previously, but then I definitely want to get to Remus. So Apex, go for it, buddy. And then the CIA handler questions that I get. But anyway,
he's probably giving me the same questions, the handler.
Yeah, hide the earpiece in your ear, you know.
That's right.
But,
that's pretty obvious. It's Samsung, man. It's all Korean made.
True,
It's probably made in China too.
But no, I mean, I think that, put very simply, is whether it's democracy or monarchy or whatever, like what matters more than the procedure is that the self-interest of the ruler aligns with the self-interest of the ruled. You know, it however you want to implement that, and there's various ways to do so with varying levels of effectiveness, you really have to make it so that, because, you know, Huntsman makes the point that you cannot base a political system off of the idea that the ruler is just going to end up being these perfect people time and time and time again. Yeah, you occasionally get an Augustus or whatever, you know, once in a blue moon, maybe once in a century, if you're lucky. But really, you have to build a system where even the most craven individual at the top is going to act in such a way that doesn't harm the people that this person rules over. I mean, okay, sure, maybe he's snorting coke off hookers on the side, but in terms of how much societal damage this person is doing, it's not that significant. So I always think about it in terms of incentive structures. I mean, think of a corporation today. A lot of corporations will, or I shouldn't say a lot, some corporations will give their employees part stock ownership in the company. Some funds that so look, if you look at, like, say, a private equity fund, for instance, a lot of times the people who are running this fund are locked in because their compensation is based off of how the fund performs. Their incentives are aligned with the incentives of their investors. Now, of course, then we're going to ignore the question of whether or not they're doing what's best for the companies they're investing in, but you understand the idea that there are structures that align incentives and there are structures that do not. And more than I'm not, I'm less, I shouldn't say I'm not concerned at all about, what procedure you use to get there. I think some procedures are in general better than others, but I don't think democracy is irreparable. I don't think that democracy is perfect. I think that there are probably scenarios where monarchies are probably better. I've made the argument that in a society in which a small group of people control huge amounts of capital and more importantly, huge amounts of control over the narrative, is democracy ends up on a national level, at least, looking almost like laundered oligarchy. And in many cases, you're trying to I look less at the procedure than I do at the incentive structures. And I think that one of the chief failings of the recent American governments is that the incentives of the rulers are very much opposed to the incentives of the ruled, which is that the endless pursuit of power and profit at the expense of any kind of wonder or Huntsman, you mentioned earlier about technologies effectively are never developed for any they're co-opted into the use to expand power or profit almost always. And so I think that when you're looking at what's wrong with what's wrong with America right now, it's that the incentives are all out of whack. And I think that more so than, putting the right people in power or because again, like, you can't, all right, maybe you put the right people in power. Maybe you find an Augustus and he ends up becoming the next Caesar of America and it renews or whatever. And then what happens afterwards? You go down the same path again. So the building sustainable states relies on good governance, which relies on incentives being aligned between the rulers and the ruled. And part of that is going to depend on what is the ethical vision. I mean, I think that a chief part of a healthy society is asking what are the conditions necessary for human flourishing? What are the conditions necessary to allow people to develop into the best versions of themselves, both morally and talent-wise, developing your unique talents and adding something to society. I think that one of the reasons why you get such visceral responses, to the state of America today is that I think that a lot of people feel that America as a country has wholly abandoned human flourishing as a goal. And I think it's somewhat reasonable to see this in you've got left behind towns that have been completely abandoned and are now ravaged by opioids. You have cities that have crumbling infrastructure and crime problems. You have suburbs that no one can afford anymore. You have a broken retirement system, a healthcare system that puts 1 in every 3 people into crippling medical debt. I mean, these systems that are supposed to just work so that you can deal with, more important things, regarding that flourishing, so that you can actually have the ability to go out and become the best version of yourself. They've all just kind of failed. And I think that a lot of people feel that it's unfair that there's a small group of people who have the resources to be able to say, oh yeah, I can become the best version of myself if I want to, because I can afford all of this stuff. And I live in a place where there's the resources for this, and I have the peer group for it and all of that. And I mean, I don't know if anyone here has read like Leon Cryer or some of the other people engaged in looking at community and things like that, but really looking at what it takes to bring about that healthy society, I think is the key. And listen, there's in the same way that there's a lot of different healthy diets, you can have a lot of different healthy societies. We're not saying that it's like copy and paste, one size fits all. It's not going to be. And so how, if you ask, well, what's the answer in America? I mean, there's going to be debate, but even if you find the answer in America, if let's say Germany decides to do this, you can't copy it. You got to figure it out, for yourself. And so really, I think that, again, looking at asking the substantive question of what constitutes genuine human flourishing, and then how do you align the incentives of the rulers with the rules, in the sense that they're trying to allow for the most people possible to become the best versions of themselves. That's what I think is the most important, those incentive structures. And I've been rambling for way too long. So
no, but that is a great point. I mean, as far as becoming better versions of themselves, I think we see that in terms of strength and ability never seen on the face of the earth, and the Space Marines, whose avatar, Remus Ventanis, is proudly sporting here.
I keep looking at his image, like at his Abby on the screen, and just thinking, in a lot of ways, these are my people. If you're just gonna roll with Space Marines as an Abby, I'm good with that.
So Remus, what's up, buddy?
My audio is not going to be very great. I'm in stairs right now. Give me a second. Like 5
okay. All right, no problem.
Streaming live from an amphitheater near you.
All right. While Remus is going through the stairs, I just want to tell everybody, don't forget to subscribe. Keep subscribing, because I got a comment over here from PCSS who says that I do not shill enough. Can you believe that? He is absolutely right. I do not shill enough. So here's what I'm going to do. Look at our... okay. Oh, shit. Oh, hold on. What's going on? Hold on. I lost it. Hold on. I have it now. Okay, here it is. You see this moth over here, Huntsman? So this moth we did in honor of Brittany Venti, who appeared in our streams, and she's going to be appearing this Monday with Uncle Doomer. So here we go. This is the moth. Look at this. Look at this beautiful moth. So this was the craft that my father created. My father, Alexander Polyakov, brilliant artist. So you can get this moth if you become a $20 patron, patreon.com/breaktherules. $5 is also going to give you a lot of good stuff. MP3 episodes. After the streams come out, we do an audio version of them. And you get our Discord secret areas there. Exclusive streams only for the patrons. And let's see what else. For $30, you are going to get a beautiful print from Giovanni Pennacchietti, who, unfortunately, I don't know where he is. I mean, the last message that I got from Gio was that, let's see over here, was that Might Be Late was working today. So that was at 5 o'clock. So I'm not sure where Gio is. If anybody could reach him, just let me know. But anyway, you're going to get a beautiful print from Gio. Here it is. Here is what the print looks like. You guys don't see it on the screen right now, but Huntsman, I can assure you, this is the kind of print that you would want to put behind you in your beautiful office. And people were saying, by the way, in the chat, that your office looks too good for like CIA. The CIA does not have that, that good taste. So
I'm admiring the symmetry of it all. Like the layout is just very well done.
Definitely,
Well,
definitely.
I'm also, thank you for zooming in on your face. Very,
You're,
very beautiful, of course.
Oh, you're welcome. Yes, I have a very, very, very youthful portrait of Dorian Gray thing going on because I'm 32 years old. But anyway, lastly, $50 patrons are going to get all of that, all of the above, plus they're going to get another custom wooden magnet. So whatever design, if you want a design of a space marine or whatever, my father's going to do his very best to get you the best damn wooden magnet space marine there is. If you want a design of, I don't know, if you want a design of Huntsman's face, I guess you could do that too. I don't know, but anyway.
No. I don't think you're allowed to volunteer someone like that.
I don't think anybody wants that. Let's be real, man. It's like it's the worst part about looking like you're in the CIA is like looking like a bargain basement version of Jason Statham. So
oh, come the fuck on! You are a handsome devil.
It's like the Walmart. It's like the Walmart clearance rack version of Jason Statham. It's terrible.
Oh,
I'm not even that good of a driver.
I think you're selling yourself short, bud.
Yes, you are. You are selling yourself extremely short. But anyway, okay, and again, and also they can get a custom, upon request, a custom a print of a thumbnail that my dad painted, as well as Warhammer 40K figures painted by Jules Hamilton, as well as another painting from Geo.
I just read the comment that I look like I'm living in a Wes Anderson movie.
Oh no.
Oh my god, that's a really niche comment, but I'm super glad that I got it. That's I don't know if that says good things or bad things about my taste in films, but that was a damn good comment. Well played.
Absolutely.
Wow.
All right. So I think
Recovered.
Remus, I think that you may not be in the amphitheater anymore. So let us know your thoughts. And there is no sign from Remus at all, so I'm going to move on to my CIA handler questions right now while Remus still gets sorted. And by the way, Lisa, streamlabs.com/breaktherules, here is the link. See if this works for the donations. And again, I really appreciate you donating. Anybody else like donating the super chats, sneaking the super chats our way. It is incredibly helpful because we are growing the show. We want this to be one of the greatest podcasts of all time, and I think we are making it so by bringing all these people together. Anyway, CIA handler question number 1. Okay, he says good stuff. Okay, so that's a pat on the back. Okay, did good. Thank you very much. Good stuff. I definitely like to keep hearing America's weaknesses so we can improve and then shift to China's vulnerabilities as well. But balancing between both would be great. Then he says, also later on, if talking China problems, ask about regional factions in China, particularly things like Shanghai-Beijing divide and the different factions in China, the different families that jockey for political power and their patrons. So that was a lot to take in, but anything there that you would want to go for, go for it. And again, everybody subscribe.
Well, I'll be very upfront about the fact that I don't know at a detailed level which family corresponds with what to some extent, right? But what China is very, and that's an extremely intelligent comment in the sense of it is like any particularly communist regime, very factionalized, but it's along the lines of industry, and industry and geography mutually influence one another, right? So what you've seen so far, and it has only worked to an extent, is that you have a largely pro-capitalist, if not pro-capitalist, at least somewhat suspicious of everything we do serves the empire, right? Mentality in a Hong Kong, for example, which is why Hong Kong in some ways is very ungovernable and required a massive crackdown to exist, right? You have a very strong business class influence versus what you would call maybe the Mandarin class or the political class that occupies Beijing. And so you do have these centers of power that are largely allowed to operate more or less unchecked in pursuit of promoting pro-business goals. And that's what the autonomous regions are largely about, things like Shenzhen, right? That's why we've seen Shenzhen be, and by a lot of global economic metrics, the ways in which we measure the economic health of a given area, we've seen Shenzhen become just this absolutely unbelievably remarkable success because by and large it's been allowed to operate the way in which it needs to. And as long as they don't get too far out of line and too sort of uppity against the regime, they're allowed to do what they want, because overall, that's the trade-off. You give people some freedom and it enhances the power of the ruling class as long as they serve the interests of the ruling class. And earlier I said my greatest fear is that the political class, the military class, and the business class all learn how to get along and really start to synthesize and rationalize these fundamentally mutually competing interests and get to a place of how do all three agree to the trade-offs. In the United States, in a very perverse and weird way, we have squared that circle to some extent by mainly via the military industrial class. But now we're seeing, Eisenhower warned us about that in the 50s. But now what we're seeing is it's the tech oligarchs that have sort of stepped forward and become the new military industrial complex, where China still hasn't rationalized and figured a lot of that out. It doesn't make sense for a business leader, if he manufactures cell phones in a factory in the Shenzhen region, to subscribe to a trade policy of let's shut down the port of Yantian to stress test it and see what happens to exports and see what happens to commercial ocean carriers. Well, that doesn't benefit the business owner, but he's got to go along with it because he's somewhat scared of stepping out of line. And I think we are seeing very slowly and quietly a bit of a maybe a burgeoning revolt happening within the non-political class of China. You're seeing the Jack Ma's of the world, right? Be stuffed into lockers, so to speak, in the Beijing high school and neutralized, and saying, okay, remember, you are the example now. You were supposed to serve the will of the people, and you shit talked the financial class in Shanghai, and you shit talked the regime, and you embarrassed us on the world stage and said, we don't know how to have a financial system that can compete with the West's. And so Jack Ma had to be made an example of. Possibly the most powerful businessman in the world had to be made an example of. But you can only do that so many times before the various other centers of power realize they have more power than maybe they think they did, and they begin to find ways to act in concert with one another. I think that's already happening. I forget his name now, but a mega mogul in Chinese food production just got imprisoned for years for dissidence and dissent against the regime. This is a guy who I think it's last count was like 15 or 20% of all China's pork production he controlled. And he is a longtime dissident. He's a longtime guy who's known to have been sort of step out of line against the CCP, even though he's a party member. But he had to be marginalized. He had to be isolated. And it seems like, it feels like maybe that there is an increasing pattern as Xi's regime carries on, as he begins to exceed the term limits, such as it is, right? But he begins to exceed what the Chinese people have come to recognize as a normal sort of period of power before there's a transfer of power to a new ruler. And Xi is getting to the end of that. He's getting more aggressive on the global stage. He's getting more tendentious and hostile. And that is worrying a lot of people who built their centers of power around peace and cooperative agreement with the rest of the world. And so Xi and the political class are now making these decisions that are driving wedges into the bases of power and money and resources that have made these other centers of power very predominant and very comfortable. And I do see, without even being able to name names as far as family names and things like that, but I do see very much a revolt of sorts developing. And I think we could end up, as is often the case in communist paradigms, you're probably going to see a period of purge and then a period of internal dissension. And that is one of the two weaknesses that China faces right now, outside of the demographic time bomb that they're staring at. You can only have a one-child policy for so long and favor a nation of males for so long before you start to get a serious problem of how do we sustain our society as an organic ethnic collective, as opposed to the United States, which we are actually growing again. We're now above replacement rate as far as the number of people that we need to perform the tasks of society. But it's not because the traditional demographics of the US are having more people. It's because we are still a nation that imports a lot of people, and a lot of the demographics that are coming into the United States are having children at a far faster rate than the maybe legacy demographics. But as a country, the United States is still growing. China's going the opposite direction. And I think it's about like 2032 is where those lines cross, where the number of workers needed to be in the workforce is still increasing in China. They're still doing okay in that regard. But at 2032 is where those curves start to cross, and they begin to enter a real tangible demographic decline. And there's a lot that's going to shake out in the next 11 years between when that supposedly is going to happen. But I don't think it's necessarily going to be peaceful. And we need to be prepared for... Go ahead.
A Pith Crew says, easy, clone the men. That's, I don't know if that's possible, though. I mean, although who knows? Like, they're doing all kinds of weird experiments with human-animal... It sounds great. Human-animal hybrids. So that's another part of this whole thing that we haven't really factored in. How much a lot of technology that would otherwise be thought of as forbidden, something that, let's say, Americans wouldn't be able to stomach, something that the Chinese government would have no problem experimenting with and implementing, and what repercussions that may have.
You're starting into a domain there that's very gray between practical, tangible output and what we're willing to tolerate from an ethical perspective as a people. Fundamentally, and there is no dispute that culturally the Chinese are very different people than we are as Americans, or largely anybody who comes out of these sort of Western tradition. If you can watch Lord of the Rings and identify with, if you can identify with Aragorn and the Men of the West and say that they're on a righteous mission, if you recognize yourself in that, you come probably from a certain cultural tradition, certainly the one that Tolkien was writing out of. If you can look at the hordes that are attacking them and saying, there is a perspective where people could say, and I've seen it argued, where you're coming to dominate us and you're coming to kill us. We don't see ourselves as the bad guy. We're just trying to survive. But you're coming to kill us and our King Sauron are going to stop you from doing that, right? So depending on what cultural tradition you come out of determines the extent to which you say it is okay or not okay to do these things ethically. Because whether a thing is unethical or ethical doesn't change the fact that it can or can't be done from a pragmatic, practical perspective, right? That's just laws of physics and the extent to which human beings are willing to maybe enforce and invoke suffering upon other people to get to that. It is absolutely evil and morally reprehensible on every way, shape, form, or fashion. The experiments that were conducted by Unit 731 by the Japanese Imperials, the things that the Nazis conducted at their concentration camps under Mengele and others, the things that they did to advance rocketry. There is no justification for that from an ethical, moral perspective. I would be happy having none of those advances. I don't give a shit what they are, if those atrocities had not been committed against human beings. But that is separate also from the practical impact. And if you're going to analyze, can they do this? Should they do this? Will they do this? Those are all very different questions. Because the should is always up for debate. The can is less up for debate. You can do a thing or not do a thing. Whether you're comfortable with the parameters on which you do that is a different matter. And so as we begin to look at what these other cultures are willing to do, the perspective is not, can they do it? Should they do it? It's simply going to be, will they do it? What loss will they incur? What strike karmically against their own humanity are they willing to incur? And if they're willing to do that, if they reject any sort of ethical framework outside of power, then you can bet your ass that they're going to try to do it to sustain themselves and survive and to increase power. I don't think the average Chinese person would, but I do think that the CCP as a political and ideological construct, I think they're willing to do far more than the average person is comfortable with.
In the same light, and I'm going to bring this to Remus as well, whose audio has finally improved, finally out of the amphitheater. This is from, and we are going to have Jason Giorgiani on August 31st, so it's not going to be this week, this coming week, it's going to be the week after. But anyway, from his book Prometheanism, it says over here, whereas before CRISPR, gene therapy on humans was achieving 2% correction, the genome of 80% of the cells in the subject can now be corrected or re-engineered if desired. This can include the cells of germline genetic material such as sperm and eggs, which would pass any genetically engineered change down onto the offspring of the human subject of the CRISPR editing. Not surprisingly, in 2015, China became the first country in which scientists legally and openly began gene editing human embryos using CRISPR. CCR5 was the gene edited target in the first human embryos edited in China. It is the receptor for HIV, and removing it from the genome of the edited embryos immunized the genetically engineered children against the AIDS virus. So that is interesting. I didn't know that that was the case. Let's see. So then, I'm going to scroll down here. It was not long before Chinese corporations such as Darwin Life and Oviscience were promising their clients designer babies with all kinds of genetic modifications, including enhanced IQ, within a decade, well before 2030. So I don't know. This is pretty interesting but pretty scary stuff. So I just wanted to give a little preview of that. And Remus,
It's almost like this question was made for me.
Yes, go ahead, buddy. Thank you so much.
With the Space Marine. So yeah, this is a tough one, right? Because I don't want this to exist. This is not something that I like. It's horrifying. But if this exists, you better get this right. You better get this right quick, because listen, if you can genetically alter things, that's what a Space Marine is. Okay, it's a person that is taken and changed into something else that can do shit that is terrifying. And if you can make things like that, it doesn't matter what it is. There's a million ways to manifest this. It's horrifying just to conceive of. Oh, we can anything germline too. That's scary, because if you can any weapon that's designed to attack at that level, it's terrifying, because that just affects that affects everyone forever. Like it's a before and after point, right? If you can change your people potentially, or even your soldiers, or any country that has this is at an advantage that's unfathomable. It's literal genetic advantage. You're creating Ubermensch if you want, compared to the ones that they would be in contention with. If you're dealing with non-altered people versus altered people, that's just terrifying, right? And even the I guess the ramifications for like the populace, right? Knowing that your government can do this potentially, right? It's just freaky. This is not something that I think is like a good direction, but it's at the same time, I don't think most of these things are good directions. It's just things that are going to happen, I guess. It's momentum.
By the way, I had to raise the audio of your mic because it is low.
I can do it closer if you want.
Okay. All right. I mean, that it is very interesting to think about the ramifications here. I mean, if we are going to go the route of all of this is not an accident, it's not just some random mutations, that there is a reason why we are here on this planet, if we take that perspective, then there is something to the idea of having a human develop certain qualities over time. If you believe in reincarnation, let's say, develop over time through through learning various things, as opposed
the same thing. It's the way you guys think of psychedelics. It's cheating.
Yeah, so in that sense, I'm not sure
gods without earning it, and as a result, it will destroy you 100%. It's not you have not, if you haven't earned the weapon, you're going to kill yourself another. You don't know what you're doing. You don't know what you're using. It's like teaching somebody who's psychopathic and sadistic but good at masking that, how to do jujitsu or how to do like an extreme, a hard form of karate or something. They're just going to kill people 100%.
I mean, it seems very imbalanced, this whole thing. But I don't know. Huntsman, upon this revelation of Remus's here, any thoughts before we move on, I guess, to the last question here that I had?
I agree with what Remus is saying and that's where, and I agree also with Apex on this, is that fundamentally humans are governed by, my thesis is we're governed by two things above the level of self-interest, we'll say, right, as far as motivating factors. And incentives is one of them, right? And a constant desire to push forward towards whatever goal it is we've established for ourselves. And that's really where the domain of morals steps in. And that's the point I was making about, can we do a thing or should we do a thing, are usually two very separate issues. I don't believe that humans, I don't think we should ever be advanced to a level beyond what we should be capable of. There is a very strong strain of thought, and when you go down like the accelerationism and neo-reactionary movement rabbit holes and things like that, there's a very strong particular strain of these things, which is like we can achieve utopia by mapping the mental genome, so to speak, of humans and being able to transliterate that into ones and zeros and thus achieve immortality, right? I can upload my brain to the cloud, which is, that's what Elon's after with Neuralink and some of these other things. And I think anybody who's involved with things like the 2045 initiative, they see that as the goal. And I think it's largely in their mind a beneficent goal, right? We can't make the human body perfectible, but we can certainly preserve the mind and the will of the human. And I think in their mind and in their ethical and moral framework, that's okay. But I think that the more you chase towards perfection, the more you try to carve off or sand off the hard edges of a system. I think you begin to find at that point that you begin to shave away, particularly when it comes to human systems, the essential humanity that more or less keeps us in check from killing each other or from totally trying to dominate one another. And I think you have to have those points of failure. I think you have to have decay in the system. I think humans have to be able to die. I think machines have to be able to break. Because at some level, the longer we go, the more we are going to try to find ways to achieve some level of non-empathetic superiority over others. Because as humans, and this is what religion attempts to square, this is what a lot of our systems of philosophy have attempted to resolve, is what will humans do in the presence of pure morality? What will we do in the absence of morality? And what will we do in the absence of mortality versus always being aware of it? By and large, I think history has taught us that we operate best as a people when we make peace with the fact that you have whatever time you have whatever tools you have to do the best you can within that time. But if we begin to operate outside that framework of that which whatever we were genetically designed for, let's enhance it. Like, let's do everything we can. I don't know how big I could get lifting weights, but I do know that at a certain point, if I put in enough time and effort and discipline, I can naturally increase myself to a certain amount. And that amount of muscle mass will be bigger and stronger than other people, and it will be less and less than other people because I was born to be a certain way. And I think from a philosophical standpoint, the framework and the system under which humans operate best is a recognition that we are born in certain ways equal. Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. That's the output of the Enlightenment thinking with John Locke and those guys, right? It's the foundation. We reckon we enshrined it first in the Magna Carta back in the 1200s. I think it was 1215, 1217, something like that. And then we re-enshrined it and adapted it, and I think even advanced the ball further forward with the U.S. Constitution. But you can trace a direct lineage of thought from people are born in some ways fundamentally equal in terms of their rights, in terms of their ability to try to pursue things. Where we are not born as equal in aptitude. We're not born equal and particularly in this world. And I was born in America, and I'm so blessed for that because I have the ability to do and say certain things that people born in other places can't. But we also have an obligation and responsibility, I think, to not push ourselves beyond a certain level. And I think at some level, that's what Remus is driving at. And correct me if I'm wrong, please, if I mistake what you're saying, is that there comes a point where we push things so far that we find some way to strip ourselves of humanity. We find some ways to strip ourselves of the natural guardrails that we are born with, to not commit evil upon one another, to not do things that are fundamentally destructive in both a practical and a moral standpoint to one another and to society at large. And if we can find a way to edge right up to that limit and pursue iterative or evolutionary advancement of ourselves and of our societies, that's fine. But at the point at which we begin to concentrate too much into perfection or too much onto the negative things that we need to resolve, we begin to lose that sort of essential spark of humanity that says we are who we are, perfectly imperfect, and we got to find ways to get together. And so when I talk about supply chain, when I talk about the great geopolitical game and the things that we're up to, it is all in pursuit of preserving not necessarily America, although I am very nationalistic at heart. But I'm not nationalistic to the extent that I'm willing to visit atrocities on others to advance my own country at all. Because fundamentally, a person who is born in China, a person who is born in Russia, a person who is born in Senegal, fundamentally that person is the same as me in terms of worth and merit and value. What they do with that is up to them. But that doesn't strip them of a certain basic natural rights that they are born with. And if we begin to advance people beyond the evolutionary and genetic things that we are born to, if we begin to create ubermensches and superhumans, and we begin to chase that as the model of perfection, you very quickly begin to bifurcate into a society where there are the haves and the have-nots, the capable and the non-capable. And you end up in a caste system that visits misery upon 95% of humanity, but great riches and benefits upon 5%. And I think that is as evil and wrong as anything in the world. So should we pursue that technology? No. Should we pursue perfection? No. Are we going to? Yeah, elements of society or elements of certain countries are going to try. And so we need to find a way to keep like the maximum number of people happy and satisfied as possible while pushing back against things that by and large degenerate us as human beings and turn us into something else fundamentally. That's probably not good or intended by nature or by God if you subscribe to that. But either way, there is a limit that we probably shouldn't go past.
Well, this is why I think that history may move in not just cycles. Like I'd say history may move in cycles when it comes to what happens on this planet, perhaps not. Mm-hmm. But history may also move, let's say, upwards or downwards based on our own karma, based on the actions that we do in the situations we find ourselves in, whether the situations are near hopeless or not. It's like Graham Hancock, who we had at the National Arts Club. By the way, I'm the chair of the Art and Technology Committee there at the National Arts Club in Gramercy Park. But anyway, Graham Hancock, when he came in there, he said that, I don't remember which culture this was, but like in a particular culture, they have the idea that when they go into the afterlife, they are asked, you had the chance to be born a human being. What did you do with this wonderful opportunity? You know, like this is in a way I do think a human test, but to the point that you said before with all this various gene editing, things like that, again, this is getting into very murky territory. By no means should you take seriously what I'm about to say. But if there was an Atlantis, let's say, I can imagine similar things happening there that are happening right now and that may be happening in the future when it comes to like all the legends warning of power being misused. And that led to the destruction of this once great civilization where, again, to Graham Hancock's point, he talks about there being this giant cataclysm 11,000 years ago. We have certain scab lands we could take a look at on the upper part of the U.S. and Canada that point to there being some, some really...
Theory.
Yeah, exactly, the Younger Dryas impact theory. So his whole take is that there were probably these very advanced coastal civilizations that existed. They got wiped out, and the survivors had to start again. And a lot of the things that we are finding today, like various megaliths, unbelievably huge. And the people themselves say that they were visited by these gods, that they were visited by these beings that brought the civilization to them, that brought the system of laws to them, medicine, all kinds of things, where today we're attributing it to the gods, whatever we want to say. But it may be that these beings were also us in a way, maybe a more advanced us, maybe a psychically better us, or maybe a worse off us. I don't know, but whichever us there is, it may be that these things keep not repeating but rhyming in a way, that we do see certain patterns come up again.
I think so. I mean, I think that is, whether you subscribe to the fact that Viracocha or Quetzalcoatl or any of the other sort of civilizational saviors that come to bring advancement or enlightenment to a savage people or to a less advanced people. The premise of that, I think, is the lesson that the hope is that you can find ways to advance yourself in meaningfully, but at the same time not leave others behind or subject people to unhappiness or to pain. And that's one of the common things when you sort of trace what Graham Hancock talks about is that ascribing civilizational advancement, when you're talking about megaliths or anything else, right, is that there's a turning point where the people are savage, they're brutal, they've advanced as far as they can, and somebody comes along that passes them over that threshold, that enters them into new mysteries of knowledge, or that teaches them things scientifically that they didn't know otherwise. That's why the stories always commonly say, it's they brought the gift of language, the gift of mathematics, or the gift of science, and animal husbandry, and whatever it is. It's almost like there is a tradition within these cultures of there is a turning point. Somebody figured out a way to iterate and move the ball forward, and they became the thing of legend, because generally they brought advancement, happiness.
I mean, not just advancement, but in the case
tough.
of the Maya, we have a galactic calendar. I mean, that is just, that is quite out there.
Mm-hmm.
And it points, at least to me, that there being a lot of
Someone's asking what my opinion on ancient aliens is.
We are the aliens. That's what I think.
I don't think I genuinely. I think it's the alien thing is just it's reductionary. It makes it so obvious and boring, right? Like, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
But no, I think it's more complex than that. And I think I think this what you're connecting it with, Lev, is the idea of meddling with something that you should not be. Right. There are many technologies, in my opinion, that are essentially Pandora's boxes. Like, you can't, like, once you open this shit, it's you have, okay, now you're in Fucksville now. Like, you blew it. Sorry. Now you're doing this instead of what humans are kind of supposed to do, which is make life better for themselves. You made life like a hell world now. Like, you can't, and to me, like, talking about the, if the Chinese are doing this, if that stuff's true, right? Even that means that I imagine that this is being done by other major powers as well, right? And being done probably covertly, because it's entirely possible for these things to be done covertly. To me, it just feels like an arms race, right? You know what I mean? Like, these things immediately turn into that, because that's kind of the nature of the world that we've inherited, which is like, when you develop something, how can you use it to, what is its practical application in terms of defense, and also eventually the prosperity of the nation, right? Like, how do we use these things? Iron is used. Do you think iron was used first to develop weapons, or to develop like farm equipment and stuff like that? Like, what was the priority? If it was possible, right? I think the weaponry, spears, things like that, are probably first on the list, just because of how feeling safe makes a population be able to. I don't know. It's like the feeling of safety gives the population the almost the room to breathe, right? Like, we can actually grow now, right? So that defensive nature is almost like a first. It has to come from, I need walls first before I can be comfortable enough to actually start building here. Or we need to understand, like, our perimeter before we make camp. Like, it's almost an inherent impulse of small groups of human beings that are just going to do that, and that works at scale, So that's the fear for me. Is I hear these things and it's like, yeah, you know what? I love Warhammer 40,000. It's cool, man. I like cool big guys ripping shit up. It's awesome. But would I want to live in that? Fuck no. That sounds terrible. God damn. No, thank you. So and let me tell you, boys, this shit's not going to be helping me and you. It's never for you. It's for them. It's for the people who can afford it. It's for the people who develop it, right? They're the ones who take advantage first. So it's always going to be a top-down situation of who's in control of these things. You're not in control of military units and shit like that. This is a top-down system. It's always controlled from above, and small council type thing, right? That's what
well, people
are. It's the same concepts, right?
Well, one of the comments that we had over here has to do with how we constantly talk about problems and not really talking about solutions. I think at least one example.
Genetic engineering was brought up. Sorry.
Oh no, that's definitely part of the conversation. But as far as the solutions to maybe not the genetic engineering part of it, because that's like hell if I know. But if we're just talking about community building, things of that nature, it would be good to get a little bit of inspiration as far as what
I
could be
definitely
done.
think people should be more civically active. I think most people are not really aware of what's going on in their municipality or their city or the and their actual influence over at least the small scale of things. You can change things in your society if you really want to, especially with friends and family, people that actually care. You can show up. Numbers mean something, and there's lots of ways I think to Apex talks about this all the time. You can build within. I mean, it doesn't have to be a like you don't have to make a new town. Like you can do things. I mean, you have agents. So a lot of I think the way people feel currently is driven by that fact, is that they feel like they have no power in their society, and they have no power to change the things that they don't want to see. And I think things like this, maybe it's possible for the people to actually make, because that's like a big deal, like changing human genome. That's a big, I mean, that's not. I feel like any person that you talk to about that, doesn't matter their level of education. If you tell, well, they're going to change, people's genetics like forever potentially. You know what I mean? Like from now, like imagine some guy. Remember, he's not God. He's not an infallible. He's some person. He has to go home. He takes his socks off. You know what I mean? He has to take a shower. He's a person. But some guy is going to change the way that human beings are forever potentially with this. If this is done wrong, you know what I mean? If mistakes are made, we just had this whole. Well, I don't know. I don't want to demonetize. This is YouTube.
Yes, please don't
you know what I'm
demonetize.
talking
Yeah.
about. You know what I'm
Yes.
talking
I
about.
know what
So,
you're talking about.
yes,
Yeah.
sometimes things, you spill some milk. You know what I'm saying? And milk spilling is not good with very volatile milk. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
When the milk is radioactive, can't be
Yeah,
spilling it on the floor.
sometimes the Backstreet Boys get really tired of just sitting around with their large piles of money, and they want to go on a world tour.
Yeah.
Sometimes the Backstreet Boys just have to go on that world tour, and there's nothing we can do about it. But okay, before we go to the last question, which for me would be, Huntsman, what would your recommendation be of certain maybe overlooked things that all of us who are watching this right now, who are listening to this, by the way, we do have audio as well. We are on all the major platforms. We are on Apple. We are on Spotify. I'm going to send those links right now. Don't you worry. But anyway, when it comes to any of that kind of overlooked things that people can do within their community, I would love to hear that. But before that, Apex and Remus, any final questions about China? Anything that you've ever wanted to know having to do with like the shipping situation, the situation with the Navy, logistics, any of this stuff? Right now is the opportunity. So just any final questions regarding China? Go.
Damn, that's a big topic.
I'm good, honestly. The conversation earlier was really thorough, so I appreciate Huntsman coming on.
Excellent.
Yeah, man.
So
It's been great.
So there we have it. So then, Huntsman, I guess the last question would be, what are some overlooked things that anybody who's listening to this right now can do to help out their community, or to create the kind of structure that's going to be much more resilient? I mean, my concern is that a lot of the neighbors that are around most people, I'm not sure. I don't want to put on rose-colored glasses about how it was in the past, but I just think people are a little bit out of it today. Maybe it's just my impression, but it doesn't feel as strong or cohesive, at least according to depictions of how it was in the past. And that's another thing. Like, you can do only so much yourself, but as far as the other people in their community, like, they're just going to be on their iPhones. So I don't know. Is there any light at the end of the tunnel as far as something that could be done to fix that, or not even related to that, or something out of the blue that people just aren't considering?
I think for most people, right? When I look at the disconnect between the boomer millennial thing, right? The boomers remember growing up in a world where everything was analog for the most part. Certainly human to human behavior was very analog driven. If you wanted to see somebody, you had to get in your car, get on your bike, or walk and go see them. If you wanted to see a film, you couldn't do it at home. You had to go to the movie theater, right? And you hear about these, and we hear about the halcyon days of before there were cell phones and computers and all these things, and how great it was, and how the kids today are ruining everything, right? And then you have like the millennials and Gen Z, the Zoomers, whatever. I don't really give a crap about generational labels, but we do have a fundamental difference that has transpired, and I'm at 37, I'm at the very forefront of that, right? Whatever the centennials will be or whatever, where I came of age at a time, 10, 11, 12, 15, 18 years old, when technology was just starting to become a way, or a main way, in which people begin to coordinate and facilitate their social lives and their professional lives. There is no world now for a lot of people who are 20, 25, whatever, where they did not grow up in a paradigm where anything they want to know, anybody they want to talk to, any need that they have at some level, socially or pragmatically, to fulfill, they can't get done from a device in their hand, or at least from a computer. And in a lot of ways, we're still cavemen brains and cavemen emotional frameworks that are operating with space age technology. And we still haven't figured out how to handle that. And that's okay. That's part of the sort of iterative process. But what I think still in some ways grounds me and connects me to reality is the fact that at some point the phone gets turned off, at some point the computer goes away or whatever, and I go outside and I play catch with my kid. Or I have to go mow the yard, or I go for a run, or I go to the gym, or whatever it may be. And it's just me and physics, and me and reality, and me and meat space, right? So if there is a way in which we meet our needs, I guess what I've encouraged people by, if there's a way in which we meet our needs from a digital perspective, balance it to whatever extent you can with the physical. I don't have to go to the grocery store, like, and go walk and browse the aisles and things like that if I want something, right? I don't have to buy from a butcher. All right. But 3 days ago, I drove an hour and a half away to pick up 600 pounds of meat in a bunch of coolers and bring it home in my truck, because it meant more to me to inconvenience myself, but to go give another human being a couple grand of money for providing a very valuable service that produced high quality product and met my needs. I could have gone to the store. I could have ordered it from Amazon, right? Or Uber Eats. I don't know. I've never used Uber Eats, whatever. Maybe I'm a boomer in that regard. But for the most part, when I have a choice between dialing up a service on my phone to meet my needs, or get my ass out in the world and doing it myself to the extent that I can, I don't buy herbs at the store. I grow them, right? I don't have the ability where I live to have my own cattle, but I do pay somebody to do that for me. And I go connect with them on a person-to-person level, at least, which is not great, but it's still better than connecting with the meat counter at my grocery store, right? Or the meat, the wall of meat at Kroger. So to the extent that you can, to the extent that's reasonable and functional, find excuses and find ways to fulfill your needs in a little bit more analog way, to communicate and connect in a more analog way, and to understand the ways in which these supply chains and these mechanisms by which we meet our needs are influenced by us and the extent to which they influence us. And if you can, find ways to mitigate that impact, or at least decentralize it and localize it as much as you can, because the computer's not going to be there for you. At the end of time, if we all hit a nuclear apocalypse and there's like 800 people surviving, we ain't gonna have computers, but we will still have each other who survives. So being able to know how to do those things and being able to still meet your needs in a real way, in a robust and resilient way, I'm a huge advocate for that. And I think that does a lot to fix a lot of these other issues we think we have that maybe we don't have, that maybe we just not need to worry so much about buying the next electronic or where it's going to come from, but we need to worry about how do we keep our family and keep our country and our communities safe and secure. I don't know. I know that's like me on my philosophical moral soapbox or whatever, but
no, we need that. We need that stuff. We need to hear it.
That influences my views on supply chains. Yeah,
absolutely, absolutely. And before we go, I just want to say, well, a couple of things. Number one, we did have a super chat from Cream Wizard, but because of the YouTube algorithm, I don't think I'll say exactly what he wants to do to the boomers. But either way, not a big fan of the boomers. But by the way, imagine just, if you will, if you had an actual Cream Wizard, how much money you'd save on dairy. No need for cows. No need for the dairy industry. Just have a cream wizard. So the cream wizard would produce the cream for you in the morning, you know, just like in the kitchen table. It's like, oh, here's my cream.
Does he produce milk as well?
I think it's just cream, but you could probably.
The dairy industry is still...
You could, well, no, you could reverse. Can't you reverse engineer cream into milk? Or no? Or is that it? Is that the point of no return?
It's a different dairy industry.
Well, I'm sure they're all
Lev is
connected.
just going to be staring at soup like, all right, get back into the meat, please.
Isn't Cream Wizard just a Pearl Jam cover band?
I have no idea. Anyway, guys, listen. Okay, now I want to say, Huntsman, it was a great pleasure to have you on our show. I really appreciate it. Guys, follow Huntsman on Man. What is that dash? That's a dash, right? Man.
Yeah, it's like an underscore or whatever.
Underscore. Yes.
We'll figure it out.
Well, we definitely overscored with having an amazing high-quality guest like you today, Huntsman. So please, twitter.com/man_integrated. Follow Huntsman on Twitter. Check out, and you have a Substack as well. So, oh no, you have a Medium. So that's medium.com.
I have a Medium. I'm building a Substack. I haven't pimped it out or anything like that because I want to make sure it's like a thing that adds value and that I do it right. I've never really given a shit about monetizing anything I say. I don't, you know, and in fact, I think the more you're paid to say a thing, the more likely you are just to keep doubling down on the same stupid thing instead of saying stupid things because you actually believe them, which is where I'm at in my life right now. I say a lot of stupid things, but I like legitimately believe in them, whether they're stupid or not. But being paid to say stupid things is also, I think, like way worse than doing it for free. So, but there will be a Substack eventually, but it's going to be like mostly free and super dirt cheap and basically a paywall to like my real world expertise if you want to do that. So that's really all it is.
I am looking forward to that. And by the way, I love the fact that you said that quote because it reminds me of this panel from JoJo. I don't know if you're familiar with JoJo lore,
One of my favorite panels of all time.
I'm not, but that's totally that I 100% will own.
I believe it.
100% will own that is how I operate. Like, I mean, I believe what I believe, and I'm dumb enough and reckless enough to like put my shit out into the air. But you know, at the same time, I tend to have a pretty, at least strong, well-reasoned reason for saying the stupid shit I say. It's just that most people may not agree with it. So,
wait, and before we go as well, I'm just curious: are you in any way into any manga, anime, anything of that sort, or different upbringing, different generation, or I don't know?
I think it's a generational thing, man. I followed all of what you may consider traditional nerd pursuits, right? Growing up, like I was in the comic books and can still speak at least about a certain time frame of both Marvel and DC comics. You know, at some length about why I love them, but you know, Legos, all that stuff. But I think the manga as to some extent, kind of the art form that it has evolved into, separate from, distinct from, but still similar to comic books, wasn't as much of a thing that I had available to me growing up. But I certainly do see the appeal of it. And as a guy that, you know, grew up on Batman and Superman and all the other stuff, it's I certainly respect it for what it is, which is a really kind of unique art form in a lot of ways. So it is cool. It's just not something I'm.
Would have been if you had a Japanese friend. Like, that would be the only way for you to get any manga.
Yeah, I think so. You know? I think the mainstreaming of that, I think, really has only been in maybe the last like 10 or 12 years, right? So but it is cool to see, and I love that people are like, the more choices people have to pursue things that like entertain them and make them happy, I'm totally good with that.
And And I also think that a lot of manga teaches positive lessons to kids, unlike a lot of the American-made animation today. Not all of it, but when it comes to just fortitude, being able to rely on one's inner power to accomplish certain things, it's very different from the kind of cultural milieu that I think a lot of kids today are growing up with the animation they're being brainwashed with. So hopefully, yeah.
Shit.
Yeah.
It's incredibly dark always.
Yeah.
Hey,
so I would definitely
suit child soldiers. That's the plot, literally child soldiers.
Yeah, so I would definitely recommend, if you ever want to get into it, I'll get you in contact with Remus. He'll hook you up with all the manga you'll ever need.
Oh yeah, I got it. I got.
All right. Oh, and Lisa Bode asks, what is your favorite dish? That's the last question. What is your favorite dish?
If I say Kung Pao chicken, is it gonna like confirm that I'm like a CCP asset in the U.S.?
Well, no, because that's that's American Chinese.
Like legitimately, like biscuits and gravy is my everything. That's like the foundation. When I had some fried chicken or a pork chop or some fried potatoes or whatever, great. But biscuits and gravy by itself, that's my deal.
Well, speaking of chicken, this is what I'm gonna be eating afterwards. I'm gonna be eating this. I'm gonna be eating.
That's cold by now, dude.
No, I'll heat it up in the microwave. It's fine. Okay. I'm gonna eat the salad over here. Look at all these greens. Look how green my salad is.
So but we can't see them.
I'm probably gonna go air fry some chicken wings and drown them in hot
sauce. This is my broccoli over here. Look how green this broccoli is. So the greenness. All right. So with that,
broccoli.
Exactly. Yes. Okay. So with that, guys, please subscribe, and keep subscribing to Break the Rules. We definitely need your support to keep growing. And also patreon.com/breaktherules. Exactly how I say it. Patreon.com/breaktherules. Go there or be square. I appreciate the ever-loving heaven out of all the people who tune in, watch this. No Chiggis Bob. I'm not going to stop. Anyway, that is it. This is the end of the show. Thank you very much, Rigid Fan, Chigs Scob, Tom, Lisa Bode, PCSS, Cream Wizard, my favorite of all time, Rigid Fan. I already said that, but I'll say it again because why not? Let's see who else we got. Cuck McNeilberg, the first. So first of his generation. Great.
Don't get it twisted.
Don't get a twist. Corn
first
Cob.
Of his name.
First of his name. Corn Cob. That's it. 36. Let's see. S's. Oh, I love S's. Up there in Canada. Pick Through. And I think we got, let's see. Yeah, all the rest here I already said before. So again, guys, thank you so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe. I'm ending this right now. Oh, and also, hold on. I am making a big mistake because I did not pimp out Calth Lives. That's first of all. So guys, follow Calth. Follow Calth on Twitter. And of course...
I apologize for my tardiness.
Don't worry about it at all. We can all be a little bit tardy sometimes. So here we go. Apex, Symaps. Follow Apex on Twitter as well, and be sure to subscribe to apexnotes.substack.com. And you know what? While I'm at it, twitter.com/LevPo, LEVPO. Follow me on Twitter, and also youtube.com/Lev Polyakov. You guys don't know, maybe some of you know, maybe some of you don't. I'm an animation director. I make animation. So BTR is something that I'm growing right now, and eventually I hope to integrate the BTR audience with the animations that I'm going to do, and we're going to be raking in the big bucks. We're going to be raking in the dough thanks to your support. But check out my animations on youtube.com/Lev Polyakov. Check out Only Love. Check out Fantastic Plastic. Check out that weird Pokemon thing I did with Ronda Rousey. So anyway, guys, thank you very much. Thank you. So this is it. This is the end of the show. This is just me stalling for time while I find the link that I have to press on YouTube to end it. But again, everybody subscribe. I love the fact that you guys are all watching this. And please keep at it. Keep being here. We're only going to grow from here. Uncle Doomer on Monday with Brittany Venti and with MK Ultra Money. It's going to be a great show. I'm really looking forward to it.